She satisficed across the hallway. A ghost wearing expensive perfume and a silver compass necklace he'd bought 10 years ago for a woman who vanished without a word. Ethan Brooks hadn't spoken her name in a decade. He'd buried every memory of her beneath school lunches, overtime shifts, and bedtime stories for a son who'd never known his mother. Now she was standing 3 feet away, asking him to fix her television. And the worst part? She looked at him like she didn't recognize the man she'd destroyed. If you want to find out what happens when the past refuses to stay buried, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button. Drop a comment with the city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. This one's going to break your heart. The alarm went off at 5:47 a.m. because Ethan Brooks had never trusted round numbers. Something about setting it at 5:45 or 6 o'clock felt too clean, too neat, like he was pretending his life had some kind of rhythm to it, when in reality everything ran on duct tape and caffeine and sheer stubbornness. He rolled over in the dark, slapped the phone screen until the noise stopped, and lay there for exactly 11 seconds, his daily allowance for feeling sorry for himself, before swinging his legs over the side of the bed. The apartment was cold. It was always cold. The building's heating system had been under repair since before Noah was born, which meant Ethan kept a space heater in the hallway between the 2 bedrooms and hoped for the best. He patted across the worn carpet in socks that didn't match, one gray, one black, both thin at the heel, and pushed open Noah's door just enough to check. His son was asleep on his stomach with one arm hanging off the bed and his mouth slightly open, a stuffed dinosaur wedged under his chin. 7 years old and already developing Ethan's habit of sleeping like he'd been dropped from a height. The sight of him, that messy brown hair, those small fingers curled around nothing, hit Ethan somewhere behind the ribs the way it always did. Every single morning, you'd think he'd get used to it. He never did. Ethan pulled the blanket up over Noah's shoulder and backed out without making a sound. The floorboard near the door groaned. It always groaned. He'd memorized where to step to avoid it and failed every time. But Noah didn't stir. The kitchen was barely a kitchen. It was more like a suggestion. A narrow strip of counter with a stove that took 3 tries to light, a refrigerator that hummed loud enough to hear from the bathroom, and exactly enough cabinet space to hold the same rotation of meals Ethan had been cooking for 3 years. Pasta, rice, and chicken. Soup when the budget got tight. Pancakes on Saturdays because Noah asked for them every week, and Ethan would sooner sell a kidney than say no. He started the coffee maker, a second-hand machine he'd found at a yard sale that dripped too slow and made everything taste vaguely like cardboard, and leaned against the counter with his arms crossed, staring at the dark window above the sink while the pot filled. The reflection looking back at him was 32 years old and looked 40. Not in a dramatic movie star aging kind of way. Just tired, worn at the edges, like a book someone had read too many times and never bothered to shelve properly. By 6:20, he had Noah's lunch packed: turkey sandwich, apple slices, a juice box, and 2 cookies he'd hidden inside a folded napkin because Noah liked discovering them, called them secret treasure, and had laid out clothes on the chair beside Noah's bed. By 6:30, he was standing in the hallway again. "Noah? Hey, time to get up, bud." A groan from under the blanket. "I know, me too. Come on. 5 more minutes." "You said that yesterday and we were late." "I was practicing negotiation." Ethan bit back a smile. "Where'd you learn that word?" "Ms. Patterson said it in class. She said adults negotiate all the time." "Yeah, well, adults also pay rent and eat vegetables. Get up." Noah emerged from the blanket with his hair pointing in 4 different directions and one eye still mostly closed. He looked at Ethan with the kind of sleepy suspicion only a 7-year-old could manage. "Are there pancakes?" "It's Tuesday." "So? Pancakes are Saturday." "That's not a rule." "It is in this house." "You just made it up." "All rules are made up. That's how rules work. Get dressed." Noah huffed but slid out of bed, and Ethan counted that as a victory. Mornings were a negotiation. There it was, the kid's new word. And Ethan had learned to pick his battles. Shoes before breakfast? Non-negotiable. Matching socks? Lost cause. They walked to school the same way they always did, down the 2 flights of stairs with the railing that wobbled on the second-floor landing, out through the lobby with its cracked tile floor and buzzing fluorescent light, and onto the sidewalk where the morning air hit them both like a slap. Noah held Ethan's hand without being asked, which wouldn't last much longer. Already some of the older kids at school had started teasing about that kind of thing, so Ethan held on a little tighter while he still could. Dad? Yeah? Do you think dinosaurs had dads? Probably. Some kind of dad. But did the dad dinosaurs walk their kid dinosaurs to school? Dinosaurs didn't have school. Then what did they do all day? Ate stuff, ran around, tried not to get eaten. That sounds awesome. It really doesn't. Noah thought about this for half a block. I think I'd be a good dinosaur. You'd be the best dinosaur. You'd be an okay dinosaur. Thanks. You're welcome. Ethan dropped him off at the front entrance of Ridgemont Elementary, crouching down to zip his jacket the rest of the way up and smooth down the hair that refused to cooperate. Noah tolerated this with the patient resignation of someone who knew arguing was pointless. After school, straight home. Mrs. Calloway's picking you up. I know. And if she offers you those hard candies again, say thank you and don't chew them because they'll pull my fillings out. You don't have fillings. Then why can't I chew them? Because I said so. Go learn something. Noah grinned and disappeared through the doors, backpack bouncing against his spine, and Ethan stood there on the sidewalk for a beat too long, watching the space where his son had been. He did this every morning. Couldn't help it. There was always that half second of irrational panic. What if something happens? What if I don't see him again? What if this is the morning everything falls apart? That he'd never been able to shake. The therapist he'd seen twice before he couldn't afford it anymore had called it hypervigilance. Ethan called it being a parent. He walked to work. The repair shop was called Henderson's, though nobody named Henderson had worked there in a decade. It sat on the corner of Maple and 4th, squeezed between a laundromat and a check-cashing place, and specialized in the kind of appliances people couldn't afford to replace. Washing machines, dryers, window air conditioning units that should have been retired years ago but kept limping along because their owners couldn't swing a new one. Ethan had started there at 24, back when Noah was still a baby, strapped to his chest in a carrier while he soldered circuits and replaced belts. His boss, a barrel-chested man named Dale, who smelled permanently of machine oil and black coffee, had taken one look at the kid and hired Ethan on the spot. Any man dumb enough to bring a baby to a job interview is either desperate or crazy, Dale had said. Either way, he'll show up on time. He'd been right. Ethan hadn't missed a shift in 8 years. The morning was slow, a busted dryer from the apartment building on Pine Street, a microwave that made a sound like a wounded animal every time someone hit the start button. Ethan worked with his hands and let his mind go quiet, which was the thing he liked most about the job. There was something honest about broken things. They didn't lie to you. They didn't pretend to be fine. They showed you exactly where the damage was, and either you fixed them or you didn't. Around noon, Dale leaned into the workshop with a sandwich in one hand. You eat yet? Not yet. There's half a sub in the fridge. Meatball. Don't ask me how old it is. Inspiring. You look like hell, by the way. Thank you. When's the last time you slept more than 5 hours? Ethan didn't answer, which was itself an answer. Dale shook his head and disappeared back into the front office, muttering something about young people and self-destruction. The truth was, Ethan hadn't slept well in years. Not since before. That was how he categorized his life now, before and after. Before was a blur of half-remembered feelings, being 22, being stupid, being so in love with someone that he forgot to be careful. After was everything that came next. The silence, the empty apartment, the pregnancy test he found in the trash that turned out to belong to someone else, which meant the woman he loved had simply left without even that excuse. And then Noah's mother, a different woman, a different mistake, a rebound that lasted exactly long enough to produce a child and not a day longer, walking out when the baby was 4 months old because, in her words, I'm not built for this. 2 women, 2 disappearances. Ethan had stopped looking for patterns and started building walls. He picked Noah up from Mrs. Calloway's apartment at 4:15. She was 73, smelled like lavender and menthol, and treated Noah like a visiting dignitary. He ate 2 granola bars and told me everything he knows about the solar system, she reported. Which is a lot, by the way. That child is smarter than most adults I've met. He gets it from his mom, Ethan said, which was what he always said, though he wasn't sure it was true. He just didn't want Noah to think all of himself came from one source. Kids needed to believe they were made from something bigger than what was standing in front of them. Back in the apartment, they fell into the evening routine. Homework at the kitchen table. Ethan sitting across from Noah, pretending to understand the new math they were teaching second graders, which bore no resemblance to anything he'd learned in school. Dinner, pasta again with jarred sauce and frozen meatballs because it was Wednesday and Wednesdays were pasta. Eaton standing up at the counter because the table was still covered in Noah's science project about volcanoes. Dad, do you think we could get a dog? We've talked about this. No, you talked. I listened. That's different. The lease says no pets. The lease also says the heat is supposed to work. Ethan opened his mouth, closed it, and stared at his son. That's actually a fair point. So can we? No. But you admitted I was right. Being right and getting what you want are 2 very different things. That's one of the worst lessons you'll ever learn. Noah stabbed a meatball with his fork and looked unconvinced. Bath time, story time. The story was the same one they'd been reading all week, a chapter book about a kid who finds a door to another world in the back of a library, which Ethan privately thought was a little on the nose but Noah loved, so he read it with voices and everything, even the embarrassing ones. When Noah's eyes started closing halfway through chapter 9, Ethan bookmarked the page and pulled the blanket up. Dad? Yeah. How come you never go on dates? The question came out of nowhere, the way the worst ones always did. Ethan held still. Where's this coming from? Tyler at school said his mom goes on dates all the time. She uses an app. He said it's like shopping for people. That's a deeply disturbing description. So, how come you don't? Because I've got everything I need right here. Noah considered this. That's what people say when they're scared. Ethan blinked. Who told you that? Nobody. I just think it. The room got very quiet. Ethan leaned down and kissed Noah's forehead. Go to sleep, dinosaur. Okay, but I'm right. Good night, Noah. Good night, Dad. Ethan stood in the hallway after closing the door and pressed his back against the wall. His son was 7 years old and already cutting through him like a surgeon. Kids were terrifying like that. They said the thing you'd been avoiding for years like it was nothing, like it was just an observation about the weather and you were supposed to just keep standing there pretending you weren't bleeding. He wasn't scared. That's what he told himself. He wasn't scared. He was smart. There was a difference. Smart people learned from experience. Smart people recognized when a pattern was going to repeat itself and stepped out of the way. 2 women had left him. The first one, the one who mattered, she'd vanished like smoke. No goodbye, no explanation, just an empty chair and a silence that lasted 10 years. The second one, Noah's mother, had at least been honest about it. I can't do this, she'd said, and walked out while Ethan held a screaming infant against his chest. So no, he didn't go on dates, he didn't use apps, he didn't shop for people. He had Noah. He had work. He had a routine that kept them both alive and mostly okay, and that was more than enough. It had to be. Around 9 o'clock, he was sitting on the couch with a beer he didn't really want, watching a show he wasn't paying attention to, when someone knocked on his door. This was unusual. Nobody knocked on Ethan's door. Mrs. Calloway always called first. Dale would text. The building super left notes taped to the door like a medieval messenger. An actual knock at this hour meant either trouble or a wrong address. He muted the television and crossed the room, checking through the peephole out of habit. A woman, dark hair pulled back. Nice coat. Too nice for this building. He didn't recognize her, which meant new tenant. The apartment across the hall had been empty for 2 months since the last guy moved out. A quiet accountant who'd left behind nothing but a broken curtain rod and a faint smell of cigarettes. Ethan opened the door. Hi. She smiled, and it was the kind of smile that looked practiced. Not fake, exactly, but controlled, like she'd learned how to arrange her face for public consumption. I'm so sorry to bother you. I just moved in across the hall and my television won't connect to anything. The cable box keeps blinking and I can't figure out if it's the remote or the... I don't know, I'm not great with technology. Is there any chance you could take a look? Her voice was polished, educated, the kind of voice that belonged in a conference room, not a hallway with water-stained ceiling tiles and carpet that smelled like mildew. Sure, Ethan said, because that's what you said when your neighbor asked for help and you were raised by a woman who believed that rudeness was a character flaw. Let me grab a... He stopped. He stopped because he saw the necklace. It was silver, a compass, small and delicate, hanging from a thin chain against her collarbone. The face of the compass had a tiny imperfection, a scratch on the left side of the glass near the south marking, that the jeweler at the shop on Franklin Street had apologized for when Ethan bought it 12 years ago. He'd kept it for 2 years before giving it away because he wanted it to mean something, wanted it to be more than just a piece of metal. And when he finally gave it to the woman he loved on the night before everything fell apart, she'd held it against her chest and cried. He was looking at that same necklace now. The scratch was still there. His eyes traveled from the necklace to her face, and the world did something terrible. It rearranged itself. The polished smile, the controlled voice, the careful posture, all of it dissolved, and underneath he saw the jawline he used to trace with his thumb at 3 a.m, the eyes that had looked up at him from a pillow in a studio apartment that no longer existed, the mouth that had told him she'd never leave. Victoria? The name came out like something scraped from the bottom of a drawer. Her smile collapsed. Not slowly, not gracefully. It just broke the way a window breaks when something hits it, all at once, every piece falling simultaneously. Ethan. They stood there. The hallway was silent except for the buzzing of the overhead light and the muffled sound of someone's television 2 floors up. 3 feet of space between them. 10 years of silence. That's my necklace, he said, and immediately felt stupid because of all the things he could have said. How are you? Where did you go? Why did you leave? Do you know that you ruined me? He chose to talk about jewelry. Victoria's hand went to the compass instinctively, her fingers closing around it like she was trying to hide it. Ethan, That's the necklace I gave you. I know. 10 years ago. I know. Before you disappeared. She flinched. The word hit her like a physical thing. Disappeared. Not left. Not moved away. Disappeared. Like a person who stops existing. Like someone who climbs out a window in the middle of the night and never looks back. I can explain, she said. Don't. Please. Don't. Not tonight. Not... I have a kid sleeping 20 feet from here. I'm not doing this tonight. Victoria's eyes shifted to the open door behind him, and something crossed her face that he couldn't read. Something complicated. She opened her mouth, then closed it, nodded, took a step back toward her own door. The TV thing, she said quietly. It wasn't... I didn't know you lived here. I wouldn't have knocked if... Good night, Victoria. He closed the door, locked it, pressed his forehead against the wood and stood there for a long time, breathing through his nose, counting to 10, and then counting again, the way his mother had taught him to do when the world became too much. His hands were shaking. He pressed them flat against the door to make them stop. From down the hall, Noah's voice drifted out. Dad? Who was that? Nobody, Bud. Go back to sleep. Okay. Ethan didn't move from the door for 20 minutes. He stood there like a man waiting for something. An earthquake, a fire alarm, the sound of her footsteps walking away. But nothing came. Just silence. He slept maybe 2 hours that night. Not because he was thinking about her. He refused to think about her. But because his body remembered things his brain was trying to forget. The weight of her head on his chest. The way she hummed when she was reading. The way she said his name, stretching the second syllable like she was holding on to it. He lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling and hated every single molecule of his memory. By morning, he'd decided on a strategy. Avoidance. Complete, thorough, disciplined avoidance. He was good at routines. He would simply add, never interact with the woman across the hall, to his list and execute it with the same ruthless efficiency he applied to everything else. He would leave for work at the same time, take the stairs at the same speed, and look straight ahead when passing her door. If she knocked again, he wouldn't answer. If she tried to talk, he'd keep walking. Clean, simple, done. The strategy lasted exactly 3 days. On Thursday afternoon, Ethan came home from work to find Noah sitting on the hallway floor outside Victoria's apartment, cross-legged, with his homework spread around him and a juice box in one hand. "Hey, bud, what are you doing out here?" "Victoria's helping me with fractions." The door to apartment 4B was open. Victoria was sitting just inside on a chair she'd pulled into the entryway, leaning forward with a pencil in her hand and a patient expression on her face. She looked at Ethan the way someone looks at a dog they're not sure is friendly. "I hope that's okay," she said carefully. "Mrs. Calloway had a doctor's appointment, and the building super let me know Noah was waiting outside your door. I didn't want him sitting alone. You could have called me. I don't have your number. You could have asked Dale. I don't know who Dale is." Noah looked up from his worksheet. "Dad, do you know what 3/8 plus 1/4 is?" "Not right now." 5/8, Victoria said. "You have to find a common denominator first, remember?" "Oh, right, like making the bottom numbers the same. Exactly like that." Ethan stood in the hallway and watched his son interact with the woman who had once broken his heart so completely that he'd spent a year sleeping on a friend's couch because he couldn't stand being in the apartment where she used to be. Noah didn't know any of that. Noah saw a nice lady who was good at fractions and let him sit inside instead of alone in a cold hallway. Noah was 7 and thought the world was mostly made of good things, and Ethan wanted to keep it that way even if it meant swallowing something sharp. "Thank you," he said. The words tasted like gravel. "For watching him." "Of course." "Noah, come on, inside." "But we're almost done with inside now." Noah gathered his papers with the slow, deliberate movements of a child who wants you to know he's unhappy but doesn't want to get in trouble for saying so. He shoved everything into his backpack, thanked Victoria, and shuffled past Ethan into their apartment without looking at him. Ethan stayed in the doorway. Victoria was still sitting in her chair, the pencil balanced between her fingers, and for a second she looked nothing like a CEO or a ghost from his past. She looked like a woman sitting alone in a mostly empty apartment with nothing but a chair and a pencil and the wreckage of 10 years stacked up between them. "He's a great kid," she said. "I know. He talks about you constantly, the way you make pancakes on Saturdays, the voices you do when you read to him, the dinosaur game. You don't get to do that." "Do what?" "Act like you know us. You watched him do homework for 45 minutes. That doesn't make you part of this." Victoria set the pencil down. "I'm not trying to be part of anything, Ethan. He was alone in the hallway. I helped. That's it." He wanted to believe her. He wanted to believe it was that simple. A neighbor helping a kid, nothing more, nothing complicated, nothing that required excavating a decade of buried grief. But the compass necklace was still around her neck, catching the hallway light, and every time he saw it, he was 22 again, standing in a studio apartment with a gift-wrapped box and a heart so full it hurt. "Stay away from my son," he said, and closed the door before she could answer. Inside, Noah was at the kitchen table, his homework spread out, his face tight with the particular brand of fury that 7-year-olds specialize in. "That was rude." "Excuse me?" "You were rude to her. She was nice to me and you were rude." "Noah, you always say we should be kind to people. That's like your #1 rule, and you were mean." Ethan sat down across from him. "It's complicated. Adults always say that when they don't want to explain, because it's usually true. Do you know her?" The question hung in the air. Ethan looked at his son, this tiny, fierce, impossibly perceptive human being he had somehow managed to raise, and felt the familiar ache of wanting to protect him from everything, while knowing he couldn't protect him from anything. "I used to," he said, "a long time ago." "What happened?" "She went away." "Why?" "I don't know." This was the first lie Ethan had told Noah in a long time. He didn't know why she left, that was true. But the rest of it, the weight of it, the way her absence had shaped every decision he'd made for the past decade, all of that was more than he could carry into a conversation with a second grader. Noah stared at him for a long moment. Then he nodded, pulled his worksheet closer, and went back to his fractions. But Ethan could see the wheels turning behind his son's eyes, processing, filing, building a theory. Noah was like that. He didn't push, but he didn't forget. Over the next week, Ethan executed his avoidance strategy with military precision. He memorized Victoria's patterns. When she left in the morning, early, before 7, dressed in clothes that cost more than his monthly rent. When she came home, late, usually after 9, sometimes later. When she walked to the small cafe on the corner, Sunday mornings, alone, always alone. He adjusted his schedule accordingly, leaving 10 minutes earlier, taking the stairs instead of the elevator when he heard her door, timing his garbage runs for when he knew she'd be gone. It was exhausting. It was absurd. He was a 32-year-old man rearranging his entire life to avoid a hallway encounter, and some part of him recognized how ridiculous that was, how much power he was giving to someone by working so hard to avoid them. But the alternative was worse. The alternative was talking to her, looking at her, letting the past crack open and spill out all over the life he'd built from scratch. But Noah, stubborn, social, impossibly warm-hearted Noah, didn't get the memo. Victoria showed me how to make paper airplanes that actually fly, like really fly. Not the crummy kind that just nosedive. When did she show you that? After school. She was in the hallway getting her mail, and I showed her my plane, and she said the wings were wrong, so she fixed them. Noah, I asked you not to. You asked me to stay away from her. I was getting the mail. She was getting the mail. We were both in the mail area. That's not the same as going to find her. The kid was going to be a lawyer someday. Ethan could already see the closing arguments. Besides, Noah continued, folding a piece of paper with intense concentration, she's sad. Ethan paused. What? She's sad. I can tell. She smiles, but her eyes don't do the thing. What thing? You know, the crinkly thing. When people really smile, their eyes get crinkly. Hers don't. She does the mouth part, but not the eyes part. Ethan didn't say anything for a long time. He watched his son fold the paper, crease it carefully, hold it up to inspect the wings. You notice a lot for a kid, he said finally. I'm not a kid. I'm 7. My mistake. Noah launched the paper airplane. It sailed across the living room in a long, smooth arc and landed on the couch. He pumped his fist. Victoria was right. It's all about the wing angle. That night, after Noah was asleep, Ethan sat on the couch with the television off and the apartment dark and thought about what his son had said. She's sad. Her eyes don't do the crinkly thing. 7 years old and the kid could read people better than most adults Ethan knew. It was a gift, or maybe a survival skill. Children of absent mothers learn to study faces early, to map the emotional landscape of the people around them, to notice when something was wrong before anyone said it out loud. He didn't want to care that Victoria was sad. He didn't want to care about anything related to Victoria. She had made her choices 10 years ago, and those choices had consequences. And one of those consequences was that Ethan Brooks no longer gave a damn about her emotional state. Except that wasn't entirely true, and he knew it, and the knowing was the worst part. Somewhere around 11 o'clock, he heard her door open and close. Footsteps in the hallway, soft, hesitant, then stopping. He imagined her standing outside his door the way he sometimes stood outside Noah's. Just listening, just checking, just making sure the world on the other side was still intact. Then the footsteps moved away, and a door clicked shut, and the hallway went quiet again. Ethan pressed his palms against his eyes and breathed. The thing about building walls was that they worked. They kept the bad stuff out. They kept you safe. But they also kept you trapped inside with yourself. And yourself was not always the best company. Yourself remembered things you'd rather forget. Yourself asked questions at 2 a.m. that you couldn't answer. Yourself noticed when the woman across the hall was sad and couldn't stop noticing, no matter how many walls you built or schedules you rearranged or doors you closed. He got up, walked to the kitchen, poured the rest of his beer down the sink, and went to bed. Tomorrow would be the same as today. Routine, discipline, forward motion. That was the plan. It had always been the plan. The plan lasted 12 days. On a Friday afternoon in late October, Ethan came home from Henderson's with grease under his fingernails and a headache that had been building since lunch, and found Noah sitting on the floor of Victoria's apartment with a plate of apple slices and a glass of milk, his science textbook open in front of him, while Victoria sat cross-legged on the carpet beside him, pointing at a diagram of the water cycle. Evaporation is the easy part, she was saying. The water gets warm, it rises. Think of it like when you take a hot shower and the mirror gets all foggy. Oh, so the fog is evaporation? Condensation, technically. The water vapor hits the cold mirror and turns back into tiny droplets. Evaporation is the part before that, when the water turns into vapor in the first place. So evaporation goes up and condensation comes back down? Basically, yes. And when enough condensation collects in the clouds, it rains. Exactly. Noah looked up and saw Ethan in the doorway. His face went through 3 expressions in 2 seconds: surprise, guilt, and then a defiant kind of calm that said he'd already prepared his defense. Before you say anything, Noah started, get your stuff. Mrs. Calloway canceled again. Her knee is bothering her. Victoria was coming home early anyway, and she said, I said, I'd be happy to sit with him until you got back, Victoria finished. She stood up slowly, brushing carpet lint off her knees, and met Ethan's eyes with an expression that was careful but not apologetic. The building super has my number now. He called me when Mrs. Calloway canceled. I didn't think you'd want Noah waiting alone. Ethan leaned against the doorframe and crossed his arms. The apartment behind Victoria was different from what he'd expected. Sparse, a couch, a table, a few boxes still unpacked in the corner. No artwork on the walls, no photographs. It looked like a place someone was passing through, not living in. For a woman who ran a billion-dollar company, she'd furnished her home like someone who wasn't planning to stay. Noah, go home. I'll be there in a minute. Dad, now. Noah gathered his things with the practiced slowness of a child who wanted to register protest without escalating to actual disobedience. He shoved the textbook into his backpack, grabbed the last apple slice, and walked past Ethan into the hallway, pausing just long enough to look back at Victoria. Thanks for the water cycle stuff, he said. Any time, she said, and the way she said it, soft, automatic, like she'd been saying it to him for years, made something twist in Ethan's chest. Noah's footsteps retreated. A door opened and closed. Then it was just the two of them, standing 5 feet apart in an apartment that smelled like new paint and cardboard, and the silence between them was so heavy Ethan could feel it pressing against his shoulders. You need to stop this, he said. Stop what? Being available when your 7-year-old is alone in a hallway? Stop inserting yourself into his life. Victoria's jaw tightened. I'm not inserting myself into anything. I'm responding to situations as they come up. Your babysitter cancels, your kid needs somewhere safe to wait, and I'm 20 feet away. What was I supposed to do, close the door? Yes. No, I wasn't going to do that, and you know it. What I know is that you're very good at showing up when it's convenient and disappearing when it's not. The words landed harder than he meant them to. He watched the impact move across her face, the slight flinch, the way her chin lifted like she was bracing for a follow-up punch. For a second, he felt a flicker of something that might have been shame, but he buried it before it could take root. That's fair, she said quietly. I deserve that. Don't do that either. Do what? Be gracious about it. It makes it harder to be angry at you. A ghost of something that might have been a smile crossed her face and disappeared. Sorry, I'll work on being less gracious. Ethan stared at her. She stared back. The compass necklace caught the light from the bare overhead bulb, and he wanted to look away from it, but couldn't. The same way you can't look away from a car accident or a house fire or any other thing that is destroying you in real time. Why are you here, Victoria? You know why. I moved in. I live here now. A CEO living in a building where the heat doesn't work and the elevator breaks every other week. In an apartment you furnished with a couch and some boxes. Why are you really here? She was quiet for a long moment. Then she walked to the window, leaned against the sill, and looked out at the parking lot below. The late afternoon light caught the angles of her face, and for a second she looked exactly the way she had at 20. Before the money, before the company, before whatever had turned her into this polished, controlled version of a person he used to know. I got divorced 8 months ago, she said. Robert, we were married for 4 years. He was fine. He was fine. That was the problem. Everything was fine. The house was fine. The dinners were fine. The vacations were fine. We were two people performing a marriage for an audience that didn't exist. She paused. After the divorce, I couldn't stay in that world. The penthouse, the board meetings, the people who smile at you because of what you're worth. Not who you are. I needed to go somewhere nobody knew me, somewhere I could just stop. So you picked this building. Huh? I picked a listing that was cheap and anonymous and far enough from my office that nobody would think to look for me here. I didn't know you lived here, Ethan. I swear to you, I didn't know. He wanted to believe her. That was the problem. Some stupid, broken part of him that had never fully healed wanted to take her at her word, wanted to believe that the universe wasn't cruel enough to put her across his hallway on purpose. The necklace, he said. You kept it. Her hand went to it again, that same instinctive grab. Yes. 10 years, a marriage, a whole other life. And you kept a compass on a chain that some 22-year-old kid bought you at a shop on Franklin Street. Yes. Why? Victoria turned from the window and looked at him. And for the first time since she'd appeared at his door asking about a television, her face wasn't controlled. It wasn't polished or arranged or managed. It was raw, the way faces get when the person wearing them is too tired to pretend anymore. Because it was the only thing anyone ever gave me that meant something, she said. Ethan felt the wall inside him crack. Not break. He wasn't there yet. But crack, the way ice cracks when the temperature shifts just enough. A hairline fracture, barely visible, but there. He turned and walked back to his apartment without saying another word. That night, he lay awake again. But this time it wasn't just memory keeping him up. It was something worse. It was curiosity. The questions he'd locked away for a decade were rattling their cages. Why did she leave? What happened? What was so important that she couldn't pick up a phone, write a letter, send a single word to tell him she was alive? He'd spent 10 years filling that silence with his own answers, and every answer was some version of she didn't care enough to stay. But the necklace complicated that narrative. You don't keep a cheap compass pendant for 10 years through a marriage and a divorce if you don't care. You throw it away. You lose it. You forget which drawer it's in. You don't wear it against your skin in a building where the man who gave it to you might see it, unless you want him to see it. That thought kept him awake until 4 a.m. Saturday came, and with it, pancakes. Noah was already at the table when Ethan shuffled into the kitchen, his chin propped on his fists, watching Ethan with an intensity that was mildly alarming. What? Ethan asked, pulling the mixing bowl from the cabinet. Nothing. You're staring. I'm observing. Ms. Patterson says observation is the first step of the scientific method. And what hypothesis are you forming? That you're in a bad mood, and it has something to do with Victoria. Ethan cracked an egg into the bowl harder than necessary. A piece of shell fell in. He fished it out with his finger and flicked it into the sink. I'm not in a bad mood. Your eyebrows are doing the thing. What thing? The angry caterpillar thing, where they get all scrunched together in the middle. I don't have angry caterpillar eyebrows. You kind of do. Ethan whisked the batter and said nothing. Noah waited approximately 45 seconds, a personal record for patience, before continuing. She's really smart, Dad. Like, really smart. She explained fractions better than Ms. Patterson does, and Ms. Patterson went to college for it. Ms. Patterson went to college for teaching, not fractions. Well, Victoria's still better at it. Eat your pancakes. You haven't made them yet. Then wait quietly. Noah lasted about 30 seconds of quiet. Can I ask her to come over for pancakes? No. Why? Because pancakes are our thing. Things can be more people's thing. That's how things work. Pizza used to be Italy's thing, and now everybody has it. Ethan poured batter into the pan and watched it bubble. His son's logic was, as usual, both infuriating and difficult to argue with. It's different, Noah. How? It just is. That's what you say when you don't have a real answer. The pancake burned on one side because Ethan flipped it too late. He scraped it onto Noah's plate anyway and poured another one. Noah looked at the lopsided, slightly charred pancake and then looked at his father with an expression of profound tolerance. It's fine, Noah said. I like them crispy. He didn't like them crispy. They both knew that. But he ate it anyway, drowning it in syrup, and Ethan loved him so much in that moment that his throat hurt. The confrontation came the following Thursday. Not because Ethan planned it. He was still committed to his avoidance strategy, even though it was failing spectacularly. But because the universe apparently had other ideas. He was coming up the stairs with a bag of groceries when he heard Victoria's voice from the second-floor landing, and she was on the phone, and she was angry. Not shouting. Worse than shouting. Her voice was low and controlled and sharp, each word delivered like a blade wrapped in silk. I said, "No, Marcus. I don't care what the board wants. I'm not coming back for the quarterly review. That's why I hired you, to handle the things I don't want to handle. No, listen to me. I spent 6 years building that company from a 2-person startup into something real, and now they want me to show up and smile for investors while they restructure my own division behind my back? Tell them I'll review the numbers remotely. If they don't like it, they can find someone else to be CEO." A pause. "I'm aware of what the stock price is doing. I'm also aware that I haven't slept more than 4 hours a night in 3 weeks, and I can't remember the last time I ate a meal that didn't come out of a container. So forgive me if shareholder confidence isn't my top priority right now." Another pause. "I know what I sound like, Marcus. I sound like someone who's tired. Handle the meeting. I trust you. Goodbye." Ethan stood on the stairs, groceries pressing against his chest, and realized he'd been holding his breath. He took a step, and the stair creaked. Because, of course it did, because this building was physically incapable of discretion, and Victoria turned. She was wearing sweatpants and an oversized sweater, no makeup. Her hair was down, messy, pushed behind her ears. Without the armor of her professional appearance, she looked smaller, more human. The dark circles under her eyes were visible even in the dim stairwell light. "How much of that did you hear?" she asked. "Enough." She leaned against the wall and closed her eyes for a second. "Great. Perfect. For what it's worth, you're right. If they're restructuring behind your back, showing up to smile for cameras isn't going to fix that." She opened her eyes and looked at him with something that resembled surprise. "Since when do you know anything about corporate restructuring?" "I fix washing machines for a living. You'd be amazed what people tell the repair guy. I've heard more about corporate politics from the break room at Lawton and Associates than most MBAs learn in 2 years. The corner of her mouth twitched, not a full smile, just a twitch. "Lawton and Associates sends their laundry out for repair? Their dryer. It's a commercial unit, breaks down every 3 months because they overload it. I've told them 100 times to run smaller cycles, but nobody listens to the guy with the toolbox. Nobody listens to the woman with the title either. Different toolbox, same problem." They stood there in the stairwell, and for the first time since she'd knocked on his door, the air between them felt almost bearable. Not comfortable. Not easy, but bearable. Like two people who'd been holding their breath underwater and had finally broken the surface just long enough to get one gulp of air. "I need to ask you something," Ethan said, "and I need you to tell me the truth. Not the polished version, not the version you've rehearsed, the actual truth." Victoria's face changed. The almost smile disappeared. She straightened up, pressed her back against the wall, and wrapped her arms around herself. "Okay. Why did you leave?" "Ethan, I've spent 10 years coming up with my own answers. I've written 100 different stories about why you disappeared. Some of them are generous. Most of them aren't. But they're all mine, and none of them are real. So tell me, why did you walk out of my life without a single word?" The stairwell was quiet. Somewhere above them, a faucet was dripping. Somewhere below, a door slammed. The building lived and breathed around them while they stood frozen in its spine. Victoria's arms tightened around herself. She stared at the floor for a long time, 10 seconds, 15, long enough that Ethan started to think she wasn't going to answer at all. Then she looked up, and her eyes were wet, and her voice was steady in the way that voices are steady when the person speaking has practiced holding themselves together for a very long time. "I was pregnant." The word hit him like a physical blow. Not in the chest, lower, in the gut, in the place where all the worst knowledge lives. "What?" "I found out 2 days before I left. 2 days. I took the test in the bathroom of that studio apartment while you were at work, and I sat on the floor and stared at it for an hour. I was 20 years old, Ethan. We were 20 and 22 and living on ramen and hope, and I was going to have a baby. Why didn't you tell me?" "I was going to. That night, I had it all planned. I was going to make dinner, sit you down, tell you everything, but then my mother called. Victoria's voice cracked on the word mother. She pressed her lips together hard and waited until she could speak again. She was in a hospital in Richmond, car accident. They said she might not make it through the night. My father was already gone. I had no siblings. It was just me. I left that apartment with nothing but my purse and the clothes I was wearing, and I drove 4 hours straight without stopping. I didn't even leave a note because I thought I'd be back in 2 days. But you weren't. No, my mother survived the accident, but the recovery it took months. And during those months, everything else fell apart. I was alone in a city I hadn't lived in for years, sleeping on a hospital chair, barely eating, stressed out of my mind. And then, she stopped. Victoria, I lost the baby. The stairwell seemed to contract. The walls moved closer. The air got thinner. Ethan put the grocery bag down on the step because his arms had stopped working properly, and he stood there with his hands hanging at his sides, trying to process what she was telling him and failing. I was 11 weeks along, she continued, and now the tears were falling, though she didn't wipe them, didn't acknowledge them, just let them track down her face like they belonged there. The doctor said it was stress. Maybe it was. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe it would have happened anyway. I'll never know. But I was alone in a hospital in Richmond, and I lost the baby, and I couldn't call you because by then I'd been gone for 2 months, and I thought you must hate me. I thought you'd already moved on. I thought if I called and told you everything, the pregnancy, the baby, losing the baby, it would only make it worse. It would only add more pain to something that was already, so you just disappeared. I didn't disappear. I fell apart. And by the time I put myself back together, years had passed, and I'd become someone else entirely, and I convinced myself that you were better off without me, that you'd found someone, that you'd built a life, and I told myself that reaching out after all that time would be selfish. It would have been. I know. But not reaching out was worse. She closed her eyes. I know that too. Ethan picked up the grocery bag. His hands were shaking again, but this time it wasn't anger. He didn't know what it was. Some combination of grief and rage and something softer underneath that he refused to name. I have to go, he said. Noah's waiting. Ethan, I heard you. I heard everything. I can't do anything with this right now. I need to go feed my kid and help him with his homework and read him a chapter about a door in a library. And I need to do all of that without falling apart. So I'm going upstairs, and I'm going to close my door, and I need you to let me do that. Victoria nodded. She wiped her face with the back of her hand and stepped aside so he could pass. He walked up the stairs without looking back, and when he reached his floor, he stood outside his apartment for a full minute before going in, rearranging his face the way he'd learned to do years ago. Smooth it out, soften the eyes, relax the jaw, become the version of yourself that your child needs to see. Noah was on the couch, watching a nature documentary about octopuses. Did you get the mac and cheese? Yeah. The good kind or the healthy kind? The good kind. I love you. I love you too, bud. Ethan went into the kitchen and put the groceries away one item at a time, slowly, methodically, using the task the way he used every task, as scaffolding, something to hold on to while the ground moved beneath him. He put the milk in the fridge, the cereal in the cabinet, the mac and cheese on the counter. Each motion was a sentence in the story he told himself every day. You are fine. You are functioning. You are holding it together. He made dinner. He helped Noah with spelling words. He read 2 chapters instead of 1 because Noah asked, and because Ethan needed the distraction as much as his son needed the story. When Noah fell asleep, Ethan sat on the edge of the bed and watched him breathe for a while, counting the inhales and exhales the way he used to count them when Noah was a baby, and Ethan was terrified that something would happen in the night because he was doing this alone, and alone meant there was no one to catch the things he missed. She had been pregnant, with his child, and she had lost the baby alone in a hospital in a city 4 hours away while he sat in their apartment wondering why she hadn't come home. The grief hit him at 11:47 p.m. Not for the relationship. He'd already grieved that, wrung it dry, left it behind. This was a different grief entirely. This was grief for a child he never knew existed, a pregnancy he never got to be nervous about, a loss he never got to mourn. He sat on his couch in the dark and put his hands over his face and felt something break inside him that he hadn't even known was still intact. He didn't cry. He hadn't cried in years, and the muscle memory wasn't there anymore. Instead, he sat very still and breathed through it the way you breathe through a cramp, slow, deliberate, waiting for it to pass, knowing it will pass, knowing everything passes eventually even when it feels like it won't. At midnight, he heard her door open and close, footsteps in the hallway, the quiet sound of a lock turning. He got up, walked to his door, and opened it before he could talk himself out of it. Victoria was standing in the hallway with a bag of trash halfway to the garbage chute. She froze when she saw him. "Why did you keep the necklace?" he asked. She didn't answer right away. She put the trash bag down and stood there in the hallway in her sweatpants and bare feet, and the fluorescent light overhead buzzed and flickered the way it always did, casting everything in a yellow-white wash that made the world look sick. "Because it was yours," she said. "Because you gave it to me the night you told me you wanted to build a life with me. And even though I destroyed that, even though I ruined everything, I couldn't let go of the one thing that proved it was real. That someone once looked at me and thought I was worth keeping." Ethan stood in his doorway, and she stood in the hallway, and neither of them moved. The distance between them was 8 feet, maybe 10. The distance between them was 10 years. Both measurements were accurate, and neither one was the whole truth. "I was going to ask you to marry me," he said, "that week after I gave you the necklace. I had a ring. It was terrible, a silver band with a chipped diamond from a pawn shop on 3rd Street. But I had it, and I was going to ask." Victoria made a sound that wasn't quite a word, something between a gasp and a sob, swallowed before it could fully form. She pressed her hand against her mouth and shook her head, not in denial, but in the way people shake their heads when the truth is too much to hold. "I didn't know that," she whispered. "How could you? You were gone." "Ethan, I'm sorry. I know that word is useless. I know it doesn't fix anything or give back the years or... It doesn't. I know. But I needed to hear it." She lowered her hand from her mouth. "I'm sorry. For all of it. For leaving. For not calling. For being too scared and too proud and too broken to find you when I should have. For letting you spend 10 years thinking you weren't worth staying for. You were. You always were." The hallway buzzed, the light flickered. Somewhere in the building, a pipe clanked and settled. "I can't forgive you yet," Ethan said. "I want you to know that. I hear what you're saying, and I understand why it happened, and I still can't forgive you. Not tonight. I'm not asking you to." "Good. Because I'm not offering." They looked at each other across that terrible, necessary distance, and something shifted. Not a wall coming down. Nothing that dramatic. More like a door unlocking. Still closed. Still separating them, but no longer sealed. "Good night, Victoria." "Good night, Ethan." He went back inside. She picked up her trash bag and continued down the hall. 2 doors closed, almost simultaneously, and the hallway returned to its usual state. Empty, quiet, buzzing under bad light. But the air felt different now. Lighter. Like something that had been compressed for a decade had finally been released. Not all at once. Not completely, but enough to notice. Enough to breathe. Ethan lay in bed that night and stared at the ceiling and thought about a silver ring in a pawn shop that was probably long gone by now. He thought about a 22-year-old kid with more hope than sense who believed that love was something you could hold in your hand like a compass and follow wherever it pointed. That kid was gone too. But maybe, and he hated himself for thinking it, hated the weakness in it, the vulnerability. Maybe gone wasn't the same as dead. Maybe some things just went underground for a while and waited. He rolled over, pulled the blanket up, and closed his eyes. In the apartment across the hall, Victoria lay in her own bed and held the compass necklace between her fingers and felt the scratch on the glass with her thumb and thought about a ring she never saw, a question she never heard, and a life that almost existed before the world tore it apart. Neither of them slept well, but for different reasons than before. Friday at Henderson's, Ethan dropped a motor housing on his foot and barely noticed. Dale looked at him sideways all morning, and around noon finally cornered him near the parts shelf. "You want to tell me what's going on, or should I guess?" "Nothing's going on." You've been staring at the same circuit board for 40 minutes. Either you've discovered something revolutionary about capacitor wiring or your brain is somewhere else. Ethan set the board down. Someone from my past showed up. Dale leaned against the shelf and folded his arms. He was 61, twice divorced, and had the kind of pragmatic wisdom that came from surviving 2 decades of bad decisions. Good someone or bad someone? Both. Ah, that kind. She was the one before Noah's mom, the one you never talk about. Yeah. Dale was quiet for a while, which was unusual for him. He chewed the inside of his cheek and looked at the ceiling like the answer might be written up there between the water stains. I'm going to tell you something that's going to make you mad, Dale said. Great. You're the best employee I've ever had. Reliable, hardworking, never misses a shift, never complains, never causes drama. You know what else you are? The loneliest person I know, and I know a lot of people. I'm not lonely. I have Noah. Noah is your son, not your social life. The kid's 7. In 11 years, he's going to go to college or join the military or move to Portland to find himself, and you're going to be sitting in that apartment alone, wondering why you spent 20 years pretending you didn't need anybody. That's a cheerful thought. It's a realistic one. I'm not saying let this woman back in. I'm not saying trust her. I don't know her, and frankly, she sounds like she caused you a world of pain. But I'm saying that whatever she stirred up, let it stay stirred. Feel it. Deal with it. Don't just shove it back down and keep moving. You're not a machine, Ethan. You're allowed to be a mess. Ethan picked up the circuit board again. Can I go back to work now? Yeah, but think about what I said. I won't. You will. Dale was right. He always was. That was the most annoying thing about him. That weekend, the building's water heater broke. A Saturday morning without hot water in a building full of people who were already irritable about the heat, the elevator, and the general state of disrepair was, predictably, a disaster. The super, a harried man named Gary, who always looked like he was one complaint away from quitting, knocked on Ethan's door at 8 o'clock. You fix stuff, right? Appliances, not building infrastructure. It's a water heater. That's an appliance. It's a commercial boiler. Can you look at it? Ethan looked at Noah, who was eating cereal on the couch and watching Saturday morning cartoons with the focus of a neurosurgeon. I'll be in the basement, Ethan told him. Don't answer the door for anyone. Can I answer it for Victoria? No. What if there's a fire? Then go out the window. We're on the 4th floor. Fine. If there's a fire, you can answer the door. Otherwise, no. He followed Gary to the basement, which smelled like damp concrete and regret. The boiler was ancient, a hulking metal box that looked like it had been installed during the Cold War and hadn't been serviced since. Ethan spent 20 minutes poking around its guts, tracing pipes, checking valves, getting progressively more frustrated. This needs a professional, he told Gary. The pilot assembly is corroded and the thermocouple is shot. I can maybe get it running temporarily, but you need to call a plumber. A plumber costs money. So does a building full of tenants without hot water filing complaints with the housing authority. Gary looked pained. Can you do the temporary thing? Ethan sighed. Give me an hour. It took 2 hours. By the time he came back upstairs, grimy and annoyed, Noah's door was open and laughter was coming from inside the apartment. Not Noah's laughter alone. 2 voices. One high and delighted, one lower and warm. He stepped through the door and found Victoria sitting on the kitchen floor with Noah, both of them covered in flour. A mixing bowl sat between them. Eggshells littered the counter. Something that might have been cookie dough was stuck to the cabinet handle. We're making cookies, Noah announced, as if this were perfectly normal, as if the woman his father had explicitly told him to avoid was not currently sitting on their kitchen floor with butter in her hair. I can see that. Victoria says her grandmother's recipe is the best in the world. My grandmother would have said that, Victoria corrected gently. I'm still testing whether it's true. Ethan looked at the kitchen. His kitchen. The tiny, cramped space where he'd made 1,000 meals for his son, where he'd stood at the counter at midnight eating leftovers and staring at nothing, where he'd built the careful infrastructure of their 2-person life. And now there was flour on the floor and eggshells on the counter, and a woman from his past sitting in the middle of it all, and his son was laughing, really laughing, the full-body kind with his head thrown back, and the whole scene was so domestic, so unreasonably warm, that Ethan felt something crack open inside him again. Wider this time, harder to ignore. "How did you get in here?" he asked, though his voice came out softer than he intended. "The door was unlocked," Victoria said. "I knocked. Noah said to come in. I told him I shouldn't without your permission, and he said, I said Dad would be fine with it because you're our friend." Ethan looked at his son. Our friend. The kid had promoted her without authorization. Classic Noah. "I should go," Victoria said, starting to get up. "I'm sorry. I should have waited for you to—" "Sit down." She froze halfway up. "What?" "You've already destroyed my kitchen. You might as well finish the cookies." Victoria looked at him like she was waiting for the trap. When none came, she slowly sat back down. Noah, oblivious to the silent negotiation happening above his head, was already spooning dough onto a baking sheet with more enthusiasm than precision. "They're going to be lopsided," Ethan said, looking at the uneven lumps of dough. "Lopsided cookies taste the same as round ones," Noah said. "He's right," Victoria said. "Don't team up on me. That's not allowed." "Why not?" Noah asked. "Because I'm outnumbered, and I don't like it." Noah looked at Victoria. Victoria looked at Noah. They both looked at Ethan with identical expressions of amused defiance, and for one disorienting second the resemblance between them, not physical, but something deeper, some shared frequency of stubbornness and warmth, was so striking that Ethan had to look away. He leaned against the counter and watched them finish. Victoria showed Noah how to space the cookies so they wouldn't merge together in the oven. Noah showed Victoria how to use the oven timer because, as he explained with great seriousness, Dad set it on fire once, and now we have rules. "I didn't set it on fire. There was smoke. Smoke and fire are different things." "There were flames, Dad." "Small flames." "Flames are flames." Victoria bit her lip to keep from laughing, and Ethan caught it, and for a half second their eyes met over Noah's head, and something passed between them that was too complicated to name. Amusement and grief and tenderness and the ghost of everything they'd lost, all tangled together in a look that lasted 2 seconds and contained 10 years. The cookies turned out lopsided and slightly underdone in the middle, and Noah declared them the best cookies in the history of cookies. He ate 4 before Ethan cut him off and sent him to wash the flour out of his hair. When the bathroom door closed and the sound of running water filled the apartment, Ethan and Victoria stood in the wrecked kitchen and faced each other across the mess. "He's incredible," Victoria said. You've done an incredible job with him." "He's incredible on his own. I just try not to get in the way." "That's not true, and you know it. He's kind because you taught him to be kind. He's brave because he watches you be brave every day. He's—" She stopped herself, looked down at the flour-dusted floor. "I'm overstepping." "A little. I'll clean up. You don't have to—" "Victoria." She looked up. "Thank you. For the cookies, for being good with him. I don't know what we're doing here, and I don't know what this is, and I'm not ready to figure it out. But thank you." She nodded. Then she picked up the mixing bowl and carried it to the sink and started washing dishes, and Ethan picked up a towel and started drying, and they worked in silence, side by side, their elbows occasionally bumping in the narrow space, and neither of them pulled away. The cookies changed things. Not in some grand, dramatic way. Nobody made a speech. Nobody declared anything. Nobody sat down and had a conversation about what was happening between the three of them. It was quieter than that. Slower. Like a door that had been pushed open half an inch and left there. And over the following weeks, the draft coming through that crack grew warmer and wider until ignoring it required more effort than acknowledging it. It started with small things. Victoria began leaving a container of cut fruit outside Ethan's door on Tuesday mornings. Strawberries, grapes, melon slices, with a sticky note that said nothing more than "for N's lunch." The first time, Ethan stared at it for a solid minute, debating whether to throw it away on principle. He didn't. Noah found it before he could decide and ate 3 strawberries before Ethan could say anything, and after that, throwing it away would have required an explanation he wasn't prepared to give. Then it was the homework thing. Mrs. Calloway's knee had gotten worse. She was on a waiting list for a replacement, her doctor said, which in practical terms meant she was unreliable as a pickup option roughly half the time. The building super, apparently having decided that Victoria was now the designated backup adult on the fourth floor, had started calling her whenever Mrs. Calloway canceled, and Victoria always said yes. Always. Whether she was in the middle of a conference call or reviewing quarterly projections on her laptop or staring at the wall of her mostly empty apartment doing nothing at all, the answer was always yes. Ethan found out about this arrangement 3 weeks after it started, when he came home on a Wednesday to find Noah sprawled on Victoria's living room floor. She'd bought a rug now, thick and blue, the kind of rug that suggested she was planning to stay, working on a diorama for his class project about ecosystems. "We're making a rainforest," Noah announced without looking up. He was gluing a plastic frog to a piece of painted cardboard with the intensity of a bomb technician. Victoria says the canopy layer is the most important part because it blocks like 90% of the sunlight. 97, Victoria said. She was sitting on the couch with her laptop open, though Ethan could see she wasn't looking at it. Her eyes were on Noah, watching him work with an expression that Ethan recognized because he wore it himself every day. That particular blend of tenderness and disbelief that came from watching a child exist in the world and thinking, somehow, against all odds, this small person is real. "You're doing this a lot," Ethan said from the doorway. "The babysitting." "It's not babysitting." "What is it then?" Victoria closed her laptop. "It's hanging out with a kid who likes frogs and asks 1,000 questions an hour and thinks I'm funny, which, for the record, almost nobody thinks I'm funny. My CFO told me once that my sense of humor was challenging, so this is a significant ego boost." Noah looked up. "What's a CFO?" "Chief Financial Officer. He handles money for my company." "Is he nice?" "He's competent. That's better than nice in business." "That sounds sad." Victoria laughed. A real laugh, the kind that came from somewhere deep and surprised her on the way out. Ethan watched it happen and felt something shift in his chest, a tectonic movement so far below the surface that he couldn't identify what had moved or where it had gone, only that the landscape afterward was different from the landscape before. "Come on, bud," he said. "Let the woman work." "She's not working. She closed her laptop when you showed up." "Noah, I'm just saying what I observed. Scientific method. You're weaponizing the scientific method, and Ms. Patterson would not approve." Noah peeled the plastic frog off his fingers. He'd glued himself to it and started packing up his supplies with the trademark slowness of a child who wasn't ready to leave. Victoria handed him a plastic bag for the wet paintbrushes without being asked, which meant she'd done this before, which meant they had a system, which meant this was no longer an occasional thing but a routine, and Ethan hadn't even noticed it forming. That bothered him. Not the routine itself. Noah was happy. Victoria was responsible. The arrangement worked. But the fact that it had happened without his permission. His life was built on control, on knowing where every piece was and what it was doing at all times. And somehow, without him deciding to allow it, Victoria had become a piece. In the hallway, after Noah had gone inside with his diorama, Ethan turned back to Victoria. "I need to know something." "Okay. Is this temporary?" "Is what temporary?" "This. Whatever you're doing. The fruit, the homework, the rug." "The rug? You bought a rug. When you moved in, your apartment looked like a storage unit. Now there's a rug and a bookshelf, and I'm pretty sure I saw curtains last week. You're settling in, and if you're settling in, I need to know that you're not going to unsettle in 3 months when you get bored or your board calls or your life in the real world starts looking more appealing than this one." Victoria leaned against her doorframe, mirroring his posture. They stood there opposite sides of the hallway, like two people on either bank of a very narrow river. "My life in the real world," she repeated. "You think this isn't my real world?" "I think you're a CEO who lives in a building where the elevator breaks every other week. I think you drove a car to get here that costs more than most people's houses. I think you're used to a certain kind of life, and this..." He gestured at the hallway, the water-stained ceiling, the buzzing light. "This is not that life. No, it's not. That life made me miserable, Ethan. It was beautiful and expensive and completely empty. I had a penthouse with a view of the skyline, and I used to sit in the living room at night and count the windows in the other buildings because I had nothing else to do. I married a man I didn't love because he checked every box on a list that didn't matter. I ran a company that grew every quarter, and I felt less real every year. So no, this isn't that life. This is a hallway with bad lighting and a neighbor who makes lopsided cookies with his son and a 7-year-old who thinks I'm funny, and for the first time in 10 years, I feel like an actual person. Ethan didn't say anything for a long time. The hallway hummed around them. A pipe clanked somewhere in the wall. Victoria's eyes were steady on his, not challenging, not pleading, just present. Open in a way that made him uncomfortable because openness required a response, and he wasn't sure what his was. "If you hurt him," he said finally, "if you let him get attached and then you leave, I don't care about me. I'm an adult, I can handle it. But if you do that to my son, there is nothing in this world that will fix what I will feel about you." "I understand." "I don't think you do. He's already talking about you at school. He told his teacher you're a scientist because you know about the water cycle. He drew a picture of his family last week for art class. Do you want to know who was in it?" Victoria's expression changed. Something broke through the composure. Not tears, not this time, but something raw. She pressed her lips together and waited. "3 people," Ethan said. "Him, me, and a tall woman with dark hair." His teacher asked who the woman was. He said, "My friend Victoria, who lives across the hall." Not a neighbor, not a babysitter, a friend. "He put you in his family picture, Victoria. Do you understand what that means for a kid who has never had a mother?" She couldn't speak. He could see her trying. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again, but nothing came out. She pressed her back harder against the doorframe and looked at the ceiling, and her jaw worked silently, and her hands gripped her elbows, and she held herself together through what appeared to be sheer force of will. "I won't leave," she said finally, and her voice was thick and rough and stripped of every layer of polish she usually wore. "I know you don't believe me. I know I haven't earned the right to say that, but I won't leave." "Don't make promises I'm not making a promise. I'm telling you a fact. I lost 1 child already, Ethan. I am not going to lose another one." The sentence hung between them like a live wire. Victoria seemed to realize what she'd said a half-second after she said it. The word another, the implication that Noah was hers to lose. And her face went pale. She opened her mouth, presumably to walk it back, to clarify, to soften. "I didn't mean... I know what you meant. He's your son. I'm not trying to... I know." They stood there. The hallway buzzed. The pipe clanked again. And for the first time since the night she'd knocked on his door, Ethan felt something that wasn't anger or grief or suspicion. He felt tired, a deep bone-level exhaustion that came from holding something heavy for a very long time and starting to wonder if putting it down would really be as dangerous as he'd always believed. "Thursday night," he said. "Noah wants to make spaghetti. He's been asking about it all week. He'll probably burn the garlic bread again." Victoria stared at him. "Are you?" "I'm inviting you to dinner. Don't make it a thing." "I'm not making it a thing. You're making a face. It's my face. It makes faces." "Thursday, 6:30. Bring something to drink that's not wine, because I can't have that stuff in front of Noah. He went through a phase where he wanted to try everything adults drink, and I'd rather not revisit that. I'll bring juice. Bring whatever you want. Just be there." He went inside and closed the door, and for the first time in weeks, closing it didn't feel like locking something out. It felt like something else entirely. Something he didn't have a word for yet. Thursday arrived, and Ethan spent the entire day at Henderson's, distracted enough that Dale noticed within the first hour. "You're humming." "I'm not humming." "You were definitely humming. You were humming something that sounded like... Was that Fleetwood Mac?" "I don't hum." "Ethan, I've known you 8 years. I've never heard you hum. Something's different. What's different?" "Nothing's different." Dale squinted at him. "Is this about the woman?" "There is no woman." "You told me 2 weeks ago there was a woman." "I was confused." "You were not confused. You were freaked out. And now you're humming Fleetwood Mac, which means something changed. What changed?" Ethan tightened a bolt with more force than necessary. "I invited her to dinner." Dale's eyebrows rose so high they nearly left his face. "You invited her to dinner. It's spaghetti. It's not a marriage proposal. Spaghetti is never just spaghetti when you haven't let anyone through your front door in 3 years. Mrs. Calloway comes through my front door." Mrs. Calloway is 73 and brings hard candy. That's not what I'm talking about, and you know it. Ethan set the wrench down and looked at Dale. I don't know what I'm doing. I know. I mean that literally. I have no idea what I'm doing. She's the woman who disappeared on me 10 years ago. She's the reason I don't trust people. She's the reason I built my entire life around making sure nobody could ever leave me again. And I invited her to eat spaghetti with my kid. Yes, you did. That's insane. Probably. You're not helping. Dale leaned against the workbench and folded his arms. You know what I think? I think you've been in survival mode so long you forgot there's another mode. You eat, you sleep, you work. You take care of Noah, you repeat. That's survival. It keeps you alive, but it doesn't make you alive. There's a difference. Dale, I'm not saying trust her. Trust is earned, not given. I'm saying let the door stay open long enough to find out if it's worth earning. If it's not, you close it, but at least you'll know. Ethan picked up the wrench again. Since when are you a philosopher? Since my second wife left me for a yoga instructor and I had to figure out what the hell I did wrong. Turns out, a lot. But at least I asked the question. That's more than most people do. The spaghetti dinner was not smooth. It was in fact a minor disaster, which Ethan later decided was probably the best thing that could have happened, because anything that went smoothly would have felt like a lie. Noah burned the garlic bread, not a little, thoroughly, comprehensively, to the point where the smoke detector went off and Ethan had to stand on a chair and wave a dish towel at it, while Noah ran around the apartment opening windows, and Victoria stood in the kitchen doorway holding a bottle of apple cider and trying not to laugh. Don't, Ethan said from the chair. I'm not laughing. You're about to laugh. I'm not. This is my serious face. Your serious face has a smile on it. It's a serious smile. Noah came skidding back into the kitchen. The living room window is stuck again. I got the bedroom one open, but there's still a lot of smoke. How much is a lot? Like, enough that I can't see the TV. Ethan climbed down from the chair and fanned the remaining smoke toward the open window with the defeated air of a man who had accepted that his evening was not going according to plan. Victoria set the apple cider on the counter and, without asking, started scraping the carbonized garlic bread into the trash while Noah narrated the disaster to an imaginary audience. And then the bread just caught fire, like actual fire. My dad says smoke and fire are different, but this was definitely fire. It was not fire. There were flames. There were embers. Embers are not flames. Victoria, were those flames? Victoria looked at the charred remains in the trash. Those were ambitious embers. Noah considered this. I'm going to call them flames. They ate spaghetti without garlic bread, sitting around the small kitchen table with the window open and a slight chill coming in because the evening air had turned cold. The pasta was overcooked. Ethan had been distracted by the smoke alarm and left it in too long. And the sauce was from a jar because he hadn't had time to make it from scratch. And the salad was just lettuce and tomatoes because those were the only vegetables Noah would eat without complaint. It was, by any objective measure, a terrible meal. The pasta was mushy, the sauce was thin, the lettuce was slightly wilted because Ethan had bought it 3 days ago and forgotten about it. And it was one of the best dinners Ethan could remember, not because of the food. The food was bad. But the conversation was something else. Noah talked the way Noah always talked, which was constantly and about everything. But with Victoria there, the conversation branched and expanded in directions it never had before. She asked him questions that adults usually didn't bother asking kids. What he thought about things, not just what he knew. What did he think about the rain? Did he think animals had feelings? If he could build one thing, what would it be? A machine that makes dogs, Noah said without hesitation. A machine that makes dogs? Yeah, you put in like hair color and size and how much it barks, and a dog comes out. And everyone could have one, even people in apartments. That's a factory, buddy, Ethan said. You're describing a factory. No, a factory is boring. This would be magic. The dogs would come out already trained and already loving you. Things don't come out already loving you, Ethan said, and the words landed heavier than he meant them to. He felt Victoria's eyes on him across the table, but didn't look up. Some things do, Noah said. You loved me when I was born, right? That was already That counts. Ethan reached across the table and ruffled his son's hair. Yeah, bud, that counts. After dinner, Noah insisted that Victoria stay for his bedtime story. Ethan hesitated. Bedtime was sacred, the one part of the day that had always been just the two of them, their quiet island in the middle of everything. But Noah's face was so hopeful, and Victoria's was so carefully neutral, trying not to want it too visibly, that he found himself saying yes before the objection fully formed in his mind. They sat on Noah's bed, the three of them, which was not designed for three people and required creative arrangement. Noah was in the middle with his dinosaur tucked under one arm, Ethan on one side with the book, Victoria on the other side with her legs folded underneath her because there wasn't enough room to stretch out. Chapter 12, Ethan said, opening the book. The door in the library. Do the voices, Noah said. I always do the voices. Do them extra tonight. We have a guest. Ethan glanced at Victoria over Noah's head. She was looking at the book with an expression he couldn't quite read. Something between amusement and something else, something deeper that she was holding very carefully beneath the surface. He did the voices. The old librarian got a raspy whisper. The kid protagonist got a voice that was slightly higher than Ethan's natural register. The monster behind the door got a low growl that made Noah clutch his dinosaur tighter, even though he'd heard it before and knew the monster turned out to be friendly. Victoria listened without interrupting, and at one point Noah leaned against her shoulder without seeming to notice he'd done it, and Victoria went very still, like someone who'd had a wild bird land on their hand and was afraid to move. Noah fell asleep halfway through the chapter, the way he always did. Mid-sentence, 1 second awake, the next gone. His head was on Victoria's shoulder and his mouth was slightly open, and his breathing had settled into the slow, steady rhythm of a child who felt completely safe. Ethan closed the book quietly. He looked at Victoria. She was looking down at Noah with an expression that was no longer carefully neutral. Her eyes were red. Her chin was trembling. She was crying without making a sound, tears tracking down her face and landing on Noah's hair. And she didn't wipe them away because both her hands were frozen at her sides, terrified of moving, terrified of waking him, terrified of breaking whatever fragile, temporary thing this was. Hey, Ethan whispered. She looked at him. Her face was wrecked, not in the polished, cinematic way that people cry in movies, but in the ugly, real way that people cry when they've been holding something for too long and their arms give out. Her nose was red. Her eyes were swollen. A strand of hair was stuck to her wet cheek. I'm fine, she whispered back, which was so obviously untrue that under different circumstances it might have been funny. I know you're not. I know you know. I'm saying it anyway. Ethan reached over, careful not to jostle Noah, and lifted his son off Victoria's shoulder. Noah murmured something unintelligible and burrowed into his pillow, and Ethan pulled the blanket up and tucked it around him the way he did every night, snug but not tight, with the dinosaur positioned within arm's reach. They backed out of the room. Ethan pulled the door to within an inch of closed, and they stood in the hallway. His hallway, the narrow one inside his apartment, not the building's hallway. And Victoria pressed herself against the wall and put her hands over her face and cried. Not quietly, not politely. The sound she made was raw and broken and came from somewhere so deep that Ethan felt it in his own chest, a resonance, like standing too close to a bell when it rings. He didn't know what to do. His instincts said, step back, give her space, don't engage. His instincts said, protect yourself. His instincts had been running his life for a decade, and they were exhausted. He stepped forward instead. He put his hand on her shoulder. Just his hand, just her shoulder, nothing more. And she flinched at the contact and then leaned into it, not against him, just toward the warmth of another person's touch, the way someone leans toward a fire when they've been cold for a very long time. I'm sorry, she managed between breaths. I wasn't expecting. It's okay. He fell asleep on me. He just leaned over and closed his eyes like it was nothing, like I was safe. You are safe. You don't know that. Noah does, and he's a better judge of character than I am. She laughed through the tears, a wet, ugly, wonderful sound, and wiped her face with her sleeve. Your kid is too smart. Tell me about it. He's going to ruin me financially when he gets to college. Victoria straightened up, composed herself, pressed her palms against her cheeks like she could push the redness back in. She was a mess. Mascara smudged, eyes puffy, nose running, and she looked more human than she had at any point since she'd appeared at his door asking about a television. I should go, she said. Yeah. Thank you. For dinner. For letting me stay for the story. For, she gestured vaguely at the hallway, at Noah's door, at the space between them. All of this. It was overcooked pasta and burnt garlic bread. It was the best meal I've had in years. She went to the front door, opened it, stepped into the building hallway, and turned back. Ethan? Yeah. The voices are really good, especially the librarian. The librarian is my best one. Noah thinks the monster is your best one. Noah's wrong. The monster is too easy. Anyone can do a growl. She smiled, a real smile, the kind with the crinkly eyes that Noah had said she didn't have. Good night, Ethan. Good night. He closed the door, locked it, stood there with his hand on the knob and his forehead against the wood, and breathed. The weeks that followed were complicated in a way that Ethan didn't have vocabulary for. Not good complicated or bad complicated, just complicated, the way actual life is complicated, without clean categories or clear resolutions. Victoria was in their lives now. Not as a girlfriend, not as a partner, not as anything with a label. She was the woman across the hall who helped with homework and knew how to explain fractions and cried when his son fell asleep on her shoulder. She was the woman who left a decade ago and came back and was trying, visibly and imperfectly, to be someone worth trusting again. Ethan didn't trust her, not fully. Trust was a structure and his had been demolished, and rebuilding it required more than good intentions and apple slices. But he noticed things. He noticed that she never canceled on Noah. Not once. He noticed that when her phone rang during their time together, and it rang constantly because running a company didn't stop just because you moved into a walk-up apartment, she would look at the screen, silence it, and put it face down on the table without hesitation. He noticed that she remembered things Noah told her. The name of his best friend, Tyler, his favorite color, green but the dark kind, not the bright kind. The fact that he was scared of thunderstorms but would never admit it. These were small things. Individually, they meant nothing. But Ethan had spent 8 years building a life out of small things. Packing lunches, tying shoes, reading chapters, saying goodnight, and he understood their cumulative weight better than anyone. In early November, the weather turned mean. A cold front moved through the city like a grudge, dropping temperatures into the 20s and testing every weakness in the building's ancient infrastructure. Ethan spent 3 evenings reinforcing the weather stripping on his windows with supplies from Henderson's, and still the apartment felt like a refrigerator by midnight. He piled extra blankets on Noah's bed and moved the space heater closer to his room and drank coffee at 11 p.m. because the warmth in his hands was the only warmth available. On the third night of the cold snap, the power went out. Not just in their building, the whole block. A transformer blew somewhere on Maple Street, and in the span of 2 seconds, every light, every heater, every appliance in a 4-building radius went dark and silent. Ethan was in the kitchen when it happened, and the sudden absence of sound, no refrigerator hum, no space heater whir, no distant television from the apartment below, was so complete that for a moment he thought something had happened to his hearing. Dad? Noah's voice came from the living room, small and tight. I'm here, bud. Power's out. Hold on. He found the flashlight in the junk drawer. Third attempt, after pulling out a screwdriver and a roll of tape, and made his way to the living room where Noah was standing in the dark with his dinosaur pressed against his chest and his eyes wide. Is it a blackout? Yeah, whole block, looks like. How long? Don't know. Could be a few hours. Could be longer. Noah pressed closer to Ethan's side. He wouldn't say he was scared. He never said he was scared. That was a point of pride. But his hand found Ethan's sleeve and held on, and that said everything his mouth wouldn't. A knock on the door. Ethan aimed the flashlight at it and opened up. Victoria was standing in the hallway with a candle in each hand and a blanket over her shoulders, looking like a Victorian ghost. Power's out, she said. I noticed. I have candles. A lot of candles. I bought them when I moved in because the electrical wiring in this building looks like it was installed by someone who hated safety codes. That's probably accurate. Do you want some light? Noah appeared at Ethan's elbow. Yes. Come in. Bring the candles. Ethan looked down at his son, then at Victoria, then back at his son. The negotiation happened in silence. Noah's face said, please, and Ethan's face said, I'm thinking about it, and Noah's face said, please again, harder. And Ethan stepped aside. They set up candles on the kitchen counter, the coffee table, and the bookshelf by the window. Victoria had brought 6 of them, all different sizes, all slightly used, which gave the apartment a flickering, uneven light that made the shadows jump and dance on the walls. It was warmer than the overhead bulbs somehow, softer. The apartment looked different by candlelight, less tired, less worn. The water stains on the ceiling disappeared. The scuffed floors became amber. Even the volcano science project on the table looked romantic. This is cool, and Noah said, and he was right. It was cool. The 3 of them sitting on the living room floor with blankets and candles while the city went dark around them, cut off from screens and schedules and the constant low-grade noise of modern life. There was nothing to do except be there with each other, and for a family that had been assembled by accident and proximity and stubbornness, that turned out to be enough. Let's play a game, Noah said. Victoria, what's the worst food you've ever eaten? Raw oyster, at a business dinner in Tokyo. I had to swallow it whole because the client was watching. That's disgusting. It was. I smiled the entire time. Dad, your turn. Your Aunt Linda's fruitcake. Christmas, 2019. I remember that. You said it tasted like a candle. It did taste like a candle. I think she used actual wax. Noah giggled. The sound bounced off the candlelit walls and filled the apartment like something warm and golden. Okay. Worst thing that ever happened to you at school? Victoria? I threw up during a spelling bee in 4th grade. On stage. In front of the entire school. The word was rhinoceros. Can you spell it now? Rhinoceros. You practiced. For 26 years. Noah collapsed backward onto the floor laughing, his dinosaur flying out of his arms, and the sound of him, free and unguarded and completely happy, was the most beautiful thing Ethan had heard in months. He caught Victoria's eye across the candlelight, and she was smiling, really smiling, the crinkly kind. And her eyes were bright, and her guard was down, and for 1 second, just one, Ethan let himself feel what he'd been refusing to feel since the night she knocked on his door. He was falling. Not fast, not dramatically, not like jumping off a cliff. More like settling, like sinking into something warm and terrifying and inevitable. The feeling lasted about 3 seconds before he shut it down. Old habits, strong walls, the machinery of self-preservation engaging automatically, the way it had engaged every time he'd felt something real since the last time feeling something real had destroyed him. But 3 seconds was longer than before, and he noticed that. And Victoria noticed that he noticed because she looked away first, quickly, busying herself with adjusting a candle that didn't need adjusting. Around 10 o'clock, Noah fell asleep on the floor between them, wrapped in a blanket with his head on a throw pillow and his dinosaur wedged under his arm. The candles had burned down to stubs. The apartment was cold and getting colder, and the power showed no signs of returning. Ethan picked Noah up. The kid was heavier every time, growing in that relentless way that kids grew, adding weight and height overnight like it was nothing, like it wasn't a daily reminder that time was passing and childhood was finite, and carried him to bed. When he came back, Victoria was still sitting on the floor, her knees pulled up to her chest, staring at the last flickering candle. You should go get some sleep, Ethan said. My apartment is freezing. At least you have the space heater. Space heater's electric. Doesn't work without power. Oh. She pulled the blanket tighter. Right. They sat in silence for a while. The candle sputtered, caught, sputtered again. Shadows danced. Somewhere outside, a siren wailed and faded. Can I ask you something? Victoria said. You've been asking me things for weeks. Why start being polite now? This one's different. She turned her head and looked at him, and in the candlelight her face was half lit and half shadow, and he thought, against his will, that she was the most complicated thing he'd ever seen. Do you think about it? The baby? The candle guttered. The room dimmed, then brightened, then dimmed again. Since you told me, Ethan said, every day. Me too, every day for 10 years. What do you think about? Everything. What they would have looked like. Whether they'd have your hands or my jaw. Whether they'd be quiet like you or loud like me. Whether Noah would have... Her voice caught. She pressed her lips together and waited until she could speak again. Whether Noah would have liked being a big brother. Ethan felt the grief rise again. The one he'd discovered the night she told him. The grief for a child he never knew. A loss he never got to share. It sat in his chest like a stone, permanent and heavy. And he had stopped trying to move it. Some things you just carried. He would have been a great big brother, Ethan said. He would have been obnoxious about it. Made up rules. Tried to teach them everything. Like his dad. I don't make up rules. Pancakes on Saturdays only. That's tradition, not a rule. It's a rule you call tradition. He almost smiled. Almost. The grief was still there, but it had company now. So something warmer sitting beside it, not replacing it, not erasing it, just existing in the same space. Two things at once. Sorrow and something else. Loss and something like hope. Though he would never have called it that because hope was a dangerous word and he'd been burned by it before. The candle's almost out, Victoria said. Yeah. I should go. You said your apartment is freezing. It is, but I'll pile blankets. You can stay. The words came out before Ethan could catch them. He heard them in the air and immediately wanted to pull them back, stuff them in a box, pretend they hadn't happened. But they had happened. They were out there. And Victoria was looking at him with an expression that was somewhere between shock and something else, something she was trying very hard not to show. On the couch, he added quickly. I have extra blankets. The couch is warmer than your apartment. It's not... I'm not suggesting... I know what you're not suggesting. Good. The couch would be great. He got her blankets. 2 of them, plus a pillow from his bed that smelled like laundry detergent, and probably him. She arranged herself on the couch, which was old and lumpy and roughly 6 inches too short for a person of her height, and pulled the blankets up to her chin. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me. The couch is terrible. You'll wake up with a backache. I wake up with a backache in my own bed. At least this one has company nearby. The last candle went out. The apartment plunged into total darkness. Ethan stood in the middle of his living room, unable to see anything, listening to Victoria breathe on his couch and Noah breathe in his room, 2 people in his space, filling it with sounds he'd forgotten existed. Good night, Victoria. Good night, Ethan. He went to his room, lay down, stared at the ceiling he couldn't see. 2 people breathing in his apartment. For years there had been 1, then 2, him and Noah. And now, temporarily, imperfectly, terrifyingly, 3. He closed his eyes and listened to the unfamiliar symphony of a home with more people in it than he was used to, and somewhere between one breath and the next, for the first time in longer than he could remember, Ethan Brooks fell asleep without trying. The power came back at 4:12 in the morning. Ethan knew the exact time because the sudden return of electricity, the refrigerator jolting back to life, the space heater clicking on, the microwave clock flashing 12 o'clock in aggressive green, pulled him out of the deepest sleep he'd had in months. He lay there in the dark that wasn't dark anymore, listening to the building hum back into existence around him, and for a disoriented moment he forgot that someone was sleeping on his couch. Then he remembered. He got up quietly, walked to the living room doorway, and looked. Victoria was curled on her side with both blankets pulled up to her ears and one foot sticking out at the end because the couch was too short. Her shoes were lined up neatly on the floor beside her. Her phone was face down on the coffee table. In sleep, her face had lost the careful architecture she maintained during waking hours. The controlled expressions, the measured reactions, the constant low-level effort of being a person who was used to being watched. She looked younger, unfinished, like a rough draft of the woman she presented to the world. Ethan pulled the blanket over her exposed foot and went back to bed. When he woke again at 5:47, his alarm, always 5:47, the couch was empty. The blankets were folded, the pillow was fluffed and placed on top. There was a note on the kitchen counter written on the back of a grocery receipt in handwriting that was precise and slightly slanted. Thank you for the terrible couch. My back is destroyed. Worth it. V. He stared at the note for longer than a reasonable person would stare at 7 words on a receipt, then folded it and put it in the junk drawer, which was where he kept everything he didn't know what to do with. The weeks between Thanksgiving and Christmas were strange. Not bad strange. More like unfamiliar strange, the way a house sounds different when you rearrange the furniture. Same rooms, same walls, but the echoes land in new places. Victoria had become a fixture in their lives, though fixture implied something permanent, and Ethan still wasn't ready to think in those terms. She was more like a recurring guest who kept extending her stay, each extension feeling slightly more natural than the last. She showed up for things. That was the part that kept catching Ethan off guard. Not the big things. Anyone could show up for the big things, the planned dinners, the weekend afternoons, but the small, forgettable, barely worth mentioning things that made up the actual substance of daily life. She was there on the Tuesday morning when Noah's zipper broke on his winter coat, and Ethan was running late for work, kneeling in the hallway with a safety pin and a level of patience that the situation did not deserve. She was there on the Thursday night when Ethan got home from Henderson's with a migraine so vicious he could barely see, wordlessly taking over Noah's homework session while Ethan lay on his bed with a cold washcloth over his eyes. She was there on the Saturday when Noah woke up with a fever and a cough that sounded like a barking seal, appearing at the door with children's Tylenol and a can of chicken soup and a look on her face that suggested she'd been up for hours already. "Where did you get children's Tylenol?" Ethan asked, taking the bottle. His hair was standing up on one side, and he was wearing a t-shirt with a hole in the collar, and he was too tired to care. "The pharmacy on Vine. They open at 6. It's 7 in the morning. I heard him coughing through the wall at 5:30. Ethan looked at her. She was dressed, but barely. Sweatpants again, a pullover, no makeup, her hair in a knot on top of her head. She looked like a person who had gotten out of bed at 5:30 in the morning because she heard a child coughing through a wall, which was exactly what she was. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "I know I didn't have to." "Then why did you?" "Because he's sick and I was awake and the pharmacy is 3 blocks away." "Do you need a more complicated answer than that?" He didn't. That was the thing. The answer was simple, and the gesture was simple, and the only reason it felt complicated was because Ethan had spent so long living in a world where nobody showed up that the act of showing up itself felt extraordinary. Normal people had this. Normal families had someone who heard the cough through the wall and went to the pharmacy before dawn. Ethan had been both parents for so long that the idea of someone else stepping in, unprompted, unasked, just because they wanted to, made something inside him ache in a way he couldn't categorize. "Thank you," he said. "You're welcome. How's he doing?" "He's convinced he's dying. He told me to tell his friend Tyler that he can have his rock collection." "A rock collection?" "He's been gathering them from the parking lot for 2 years. He has 47. Each one has a name." Victoria's mouth twitched. "Of course they do." Noah recovered in 3 days, during which time Victoria came over every evening after work. She was still running the company remotely, taking calls in her apartment, reviewing documents on her laptop, managing a billion-dollar organization from a walk-up with inconsistent hot water, and sat with him on the couch watching nature documentaries while Ethan made soup and tried to figure out what exactly was happening to his life. It was during one of these evenings, Noah asleep with his head on the armrest, Victoria on the other end of the couch with her laptop open but ignored, Ethan in the kitchen doing dishes, that she said something that stopped him mid-scrub. "Marcus wants me to come back." Ethan turned off the faucet. "Come back where?" "To the office, full-time, in person. The board has been putting pressure on him for months and he's been shielding me from it, but he can't hold them off much longer. There's a shareholder meeting in January and they want me there." "Where's the office?" "Downtown, 45 minutes with traffic, but that's not the issue. The issue is the hours. If I go back full-time, I'm talking 12, 14 hours a day minimum. Board dinners, investor calls. The kind of schedule where you leave before the sun comes up and get home after it goes down." Ethan dried his hands on the dish towel, slowly. "So you'd be gone?" "I'd be busy. There's a difference." "Not to a 7-year-old there isn't." Victoria closed her laptop with a soft click. She looked at Noah, asleep on the couch, his breathing still slightly congested, his hair matted with sweat from the fever that had broken that afternoon. Then she looked at Ethan, and her face held an expression he hadn't seen before. Not controlled, not polished, but conflicted in a way that was raw and visible, like watching someone stand at a fork in a road and not know which direction led home. "I know," she said. "I know there's no difference to him." "Then what are you going to do?" "I don't know. That's not good enough." "I know that either." Ethan draped the towel over the oven handle and walked to the living room doorway. He leaned against the frame and crossed his arms, and the posture was defensive, and he knew it was defensive, and he couldn't make himself stand any other way. "Let me be clear about something," he said. "Whatever this is, whatever we're doing here, you and me and Noah, I didn't plan it. I didn't want it. I spent 10 years making sure nothing like this could happen, and it happened anyway. And I've been letting it happen because my son is happier than I've ever seen him. He laughs more. He talks more. He drew you into his family picture. He trusts you. And if you go back to that office and disappear into 14-hour days and board dinners and quarterly reports, he won't understand the difference between busy and gone. He'll just know you're not there. Ethan, I'm not done. I can handle being left. I've been left before and I survived it, and I'll survive it again. But Noah hasn't been left by someone he chose. His mother didn't give him a choice. She just walked out. You're the first person he's let in on his own terms, and I'm not leaving. You say that, but the board is calling, and Marcus is calling, and the stock price is calling, and I know how this works. I fix washing machines for a living, but I'm not stupid. I know what a billion-dollar company does to a person. It eats them. It eats their time and their attention and their presence until there's nothing left for anyone else. Victoria stood up from the couch, careful not to wake Noah. She stepped around the coffee table and walked toward Ethan until she was standing 3 feet away, close enough that he could see the redness in her eyes, the tension in her jaw, the way her hands were balled at her sides like she was physically holding herself back from something. "You're right," she said, "about all of it. The company does eat people. It ate me for 6 years. It ate my marriage and my health and my ability to have a conversation about anything other than revenue projections. And then I moved into this building and a 7-year-old asked me to help him with fractions. And for the first time since I can remember, I felt like a human being instead of a job title. So what are you going to tell Marcus?" "I don't know yet." "Victoria, I said I don't know yet. And I'm being honest with you about that because the alternative is lying, and I've had enough lying to last me the rest of my life. I need to think. I need to figure out what I can restructure, what I can delegate, what I can change so that going back doesn't mean disappearing. Because you're right. I am the CEO of a company I built from nothing, and I can't just pretend that doesn't exist. But I can decide what it looks like. I can decide how much of me it gets." "Can you?" "I think so. I'm not sure. But I'm going to try, and I'm asking you to let me try before you decide I've already failed." The apartment was quiet, except for Noah's slightly wheezy breathing and the hum of the refrigerator. Ethan looked at Victoria and saw 2 people occupying the same space. The CEO in the boardroom, sharp and commanding, and the woman on his couch, patient and present and covered in a 7-year-old's germs. He wanted to believe they could be the same person. He wasn't sure they could. "One condition," he said. "Name it. You tell Noah yourself. Whatever you decide, if you go back, if you change your schedule, if anything changes, you tell him yourself. You don't disappear and let me explain it. You look him in the eye and you tell him the truth." "I will." "Promise me." "I promise." He nodded, once, short and sharp. Then he went back to the kitchen and finished the dishes, and Victoria went back to the couch and sat with Noah until he woke up asking for juice, and neither of them mentioned the conversation again that night. But it sat between them like a third presence in the room, heavy, unresolved, waiting. 3 days before Christmas, Noah asked Ethan a question that he should have seen coming and didn't. "Can Victoria come to Christmas?" They were in the grocery store, navigating the holiday chaos with a cart that had one wobbly wheel and a list Ethan had written on the back of an envelope. The store was packed, families with crying children, elderly couples blocking the aisles, a man in a Santa hat arguing loudly on his phone about ham. Christmas is just us, Bud. It's always just us. I know, but she'll be alone. Ethan stopped the cart. What? She told me. I asked her what she was doing for Christmas, and she said probably working. That means alone, Dad. Nobody works on Christmas unless they're alone. Some people like being alone. Nobody likes being alone on Christmas. That's like saying some people like having the flu. Ethan gripped the cart handle and looked at the ceiling, which was covered in tinsel that was hanging by a thread. A fluorescent light buzzed overhead. Somewhere in the store, a child was screaming about candy canes. I'll think about it, he said, which they both knew meant yes. Christmas morning arrived cold and gray, with a thin frost on the windows that made the apartment look like the inside of a snow globe. Noah was awake at 5:15. Ethan heard him trying to be quiet and failing, the way he failed every Christmas, his excitement producing a volume of sound that his whispered, "I'm being quiet, Dad," could not contain. They opened presents on the living room floor. The gifts were modest. Ethan's budget didn't allow for extravagance, and Noah had long ago learned to find joy in small things without being told to, which was either a sign of good parenting or a survival skill, or both. A new set of colored pencils, a book about marine biology, a pair of sneakers that Noah immediately tried on and wore around the apartment for 20 minutes, sliding on the kitchen tiles like a tiny ice skater. At noon, Victoria knocked. She was wearing a red sweater that was slightly too big for her and carrying a bag that clinked when she moved. I brought cider, she said, and something for Noah, if that's okay. Ethan hesitated. The gifting thing felt like a line, another step into territory that was comfortable for Noah and terrifying for Ethan. But Noah was already at the door, bouncing on his new sneakers, and saying no would require an explanation that Ethan wasn't prepared to deliver. Come in. The gift was a telescope, not an expensive one, a beginner's model, compact, the kind you could set up on a windowsill and point at the moon. It came in a box with a star chart and a small guidebook, and when Noah opened it, his face went through an expression that Ethan had never seen before. Not excitement, exactly. Something deeper, something closer to awe. This is for me? If your dad says it's okay. Noah looked at Ethan. His eyes were enormous. Dad? Ethan looked at the telescope, then at Victoria, then at Noah. The telescope was thoughtful, not flashy, not expensive, not trying too hard. It was the kind of gift someone gives when they've been paying attention, when they know that the kid they're buying for spends 20 minutes every night staring out the window at the sky and asking questions about stars that Ethan can't answer. Yeah, bud, it's okay. Noah launched himself at Victoria with the full-body impact of a 7-year-old who has forgotten that adults are breakable. She caught him, barely, stumbling backward a step, and he wrapped his arms around her waist and squeezed, and she put her hands on his back and held him, and over his head, she looked at Ethan with an expression that was grateful and terrified, and something else, something he recognized because he felt it too. This was real. Whatever this was, it was real, and real things could be lost. They spent the afternoon setting up the telescope by the window, which involved 20 minutes of trying to understand the instruction manual, 15 minutes of Noah insisting he could do it himself, 10 minutes of Victoria quietly assembling it, while Noah and Ethan argued about which direction was north, and 5 minutes of Noah looking through the eyepiece and declaring that he could see the moon even though it was the middle of the day and the moon was barely visible. It's right there, he insisted. That white thing. That might be a cloud, buddy. It's the moon. Victoria, tell him it's the moon. Victoria squinted through the eyepiece. It could be the moon. It's in the right general area. See? The moon. I found the moon on Christmas Day. This is the best present ever. Ethan made dinner. Actual dinner, not pasta from a box. A roast chicken that he'd been anxious about all week because he'd never roasted a chicken before, and the recipe he'd found online had 17 steps and used words like truss and baste that he had to look up. The chicken came out dry on one side and underdone on the other, and the potatoes were slightly burnt, and the green beans were overcooked to the point of surrender. This is delicious, Victoria said, sawing through a piece of chicken that resisted the knife. You're being polite. I'm being encouraging. The chicken is dry. Parts of the chicken are dry. Other parts are excellent. Which parts? The parts I haven't tried yet. Noah ate everything on his plate without complaint, which was either a Christmas miracle or evidence that his standards had been lowered by years of Ethan's cooking. He asked for seconds of the burnt potatoes, which Ethan decided to interpret as a compliment. After dinner, after Noah had spent another hour with his telescope and been put to bed with 2 chapters instead of 1, because it was Christmas, Ethan and Victoria sat on the couch with mugs of cider and the apartment quiet around them. The candles from the blackout were gone, used up, but Victoria had brought new ones, and they flickered on the coffee table, casting the same warm light as before. "I talked to Marcus yesterday," she said. Ethan's hands tightened around his mug. "And?" "I told him I'd come back. Part-time." Part-time. 3 days a week in the office, the rest remote. No board dinners unless absolutely necessary. No overnight trips, no weekends. He agreed to that? He didn't love it. The board didn't love it. I told them they could accept my terms or accept my resignation. And since replacing a CEO mid-fiscal year would cause a stock drop that would make their current concerns look like a rounding error, they accepted my terms. Ethan stared at her. "You threatened to quit." "I presented a compelling business case for flexible leadership." "You threatened to quit." "I aggressively negotiated." A pause. "Yes, I threatened to quit." "For what?" Victoria set her mug down and turned to face him. The candlelight caught the compass necklace, and the little scratch on the glass flared bright for a second before going dim again. "You know for what?" "I want to hear you say it. For this. For Noah. For Tuesday mornings and burnt potatoes and a kid who thinks a cloud might be the moon. For the chance to be here, actually here, not performing being here between conference calls. For the thing I lost 10 years ago and somehow found again in a building with bad plumbing and a landlord who doesn't return calls. You left out the part about the heating. The heating is criminal. I'm going to report it to someone eventually." "Good luck. 3 tenants have tried." "They didn't have a legal team." Ethan almost laughed. Almost. Instead, he took a sip of cider and looked at the window, where Noah's telescope pointed toward a sky they couldn't see because the clouds had rolled in. The apartment was warm. The space heater was working for once, and the candles were steady, and the cider was sweet, and for one dangerous, reckless moment, Ethan let himself imagine this as permanent. Not a guest, not a recurring visit, but this: couch, cider, candles, the two of them sitting close enough that their shoulders almost touched, the sound of Noah breathing softly in the next room. "I need to tell you something," he said, "and I don't know how to say it, so I'm just going to say it badly." "Okay. I spent 10 years making sure nobody could get close enough to hurt me. It worked. Nobody hurt me. Nobody anythinged me. I just existed. I went to work, I came home, I raised my kid, I repeated the whole thing the next day. And it was fine, it was stable, it was safe. And I told myself that safe was enough. But it's not. No, it's not. And I hate that it's not, because safe was working. Safe kept us alive. Safe meant I never had to stand in an apartment at 2 a.m. wondering why someone left. Safe meant Noah never had to watch his father fall apart. And now? Now you're sitting on my couch, and my son bought you a Christmas card with his own allowance money, and you threatened to quit a billion-dollar company so you could be here 3 days a week, and I'm terrified. Victoria didn't say anything for a long moment. She picked up her mug, held it without drinking, put it back down. Then she reached over and took Ethan's hand. He flinched. Not because the contact was unwelcome, but because it had been so long since anyone had touched him like that, deliberately, gently, with intention, that his body didn't know how to process it. His first instinct was to pull away. His second instinct was to hold on. The two impulses collided somewhere in his wrist and left him frozen, his hand in hers, his heart hammering against his ribs like it was trying to escape. "I'm terrified too," she said. "I've run a company through a market crash and a hostile takeover attempt and a supply chain crisis that nearly bankrupted us. None of that scared me as much as this does." "That's not comforting." "It's not supposed to be comforting. It's supposed to be honest." Ethan looked at their hands. Hers was smaller than his, her fingers thinner, her nails short and unpolished. There was a callus on her middle finger from holding a pen and a faint ink stain on her thumb. These were not the hands of a CEO in a magazine. These were the hands of a woman who worked too hard and forgot to eat and heard a child coughing through a wall at 5:30 in the morning and went to the pharmacy before the sun came up. He didn't pull away. "I can't promise you it's going to be okay," he said. "I can't promise I won't panic or shut down or build a wall in the middle of a conversation because something you said reminded me of something from before. I'm not good at this. I was never good at this, even when we were kids. I'm too cautious and too stubborn, and I hold grudges longer than a reasonable person should. I know. And you still, but yes. You didn't let me finish. You were going to ask if I still want this even though you're difficult. The answer is yes. You were difficult at 22 and I loved you anyway. You're difficult at 32 and I—" She stopped. The word hung in the air, unfinished, enormous. She pressed her lips together and looked away, toward the window, toward the telescope, toward anywhere that wasn't his face. "You what?" he asked, and his voice came out rougher than he intended. "I think you know. I want to hear you say it. Not yet. Not tonight. If I say it now, you'll think it's the cider or the candles or the holiday talking. And when I say it, I want you to know it's real." Ethan looked at her for a long time. Then he squeezed her hand. Once, brief, just enough pressure to communicate something that his mouth couldn't, and let go. "Okay," he said. "Not tonight." "Okay." They sat there for another hour, not touching, not talking much, watching the candles burn and listening to the building settle around them. At some point, Ethan realized that the silence between them had changed. For months it had been loaded, weighted with history and grievance and unanswered questions. Now it was just silence, the comfortable kind, the kind that exists between people who don't need to fill every second with sound to prove they're still connected. Victoria left at midnight. At the door she paused and turned back. "Ethan?" "Yeah." "The chicken was really dry." "I know. Like, impressively dry. I think you invented a new texture." "Get out of my apartment." She grinned, a full, unguarded grin that showed the gap between her front teeth that he used to love, that he still loved, that he had never stopped loving even when he hated her, and stepped into the hallway and closed her door, and Ethan stood in his doorway and listened to the sound of her lock turning, and felt something he hadn't felt in so long that it took him a minute to identify it. Happiness. Imperfect, uncertain, fragile, scary as hell happiness. He closed his door and went to check on Noah. His son was sprawled across the bed in his usual disaster pose, one arm off the side, mouth open, dinosaur wedged under his chin. But something was different. On the nightstand, next to his glass of water and his library book, was a piece of paper. Ethan picked it up and tilted it toward the hallway light. It was a drawing, colored pencils, the new ones from this morning. 3 figures standing in front of a building that was obviously their apartment complex, complete with the wobbly railing and the broken light above the entrance. The tallest figure had brown hair and was wearing a blue shirt. The medium figure had dark hair and was wearing a red sweater. The smallest figure stood between them, holding both their hands, grinning with a smile that took up half his face. Beside them, slightly smaller, drawn with particular care, was a dog. Brown, with floppy ears and a tongue hanging out. Underneath, in Noah's careful second-grade handwriting, 2 words. My family. Ethan held the drawing and looked at his sleeping son and felt the last wall inside him, the one he'd been building for 10 years, the one he'd reinforced after every betrayal and every disappearance, the one he'd maintained with discipline and routine, and the constant, exhausting refusal to need anyone, crack from foundation to ceiling. Not fall, not yet. But crack. Wide enough to see through, wide enough to let light in. He put the drawing back on the nightstand, pulled Noah's blanket up, and kissed his forehead. Then he went to his room and lay down and stared at the ceiling and thought about a woman in a red sweater who threatened to restructure a billion-dollar company for burnt potatoes and a cloud that might have been the moon. He reached for his phone, typed a message, deleted it. Typed it again, deleted it again, typed it a 3rd time and hit send before the deleting reflex could kick in. The chicken was dry, but the company was good. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. That might be the nicest thing you've ever said to me. Don't get used to it. Too late. He put the phone on the nightstand, face down, next to Noah's drawing. He closed his eyes. The apartment was warm. The building was quiet. Somewhere across the hall, a woman was lying in her own bed, holding a compass necklace, smiling at a screen. And Ethan Brooks, who had spent 10 years surviving, began, slowly, clumsily, with all the grace of a man who had forgotten how, to live. January came in hard. The temperature dropped to single digits the first week, and the building's heating system, which had been limping along on Ethan's temporary repairs since October, finally gave up entirely. Gary the super called an emergency meeting in the lobby that consisted of 12 angry tenants, a lot of pointing fingers, and Gary standing in the corner looking like a man who had seriously miscalculated his career choices. The boiler's dead, Gary said. Like, dead. The repair guy says the replacement part hasn't been manufactured since 1987. So what are we supposed to do? Asked Mrs. Calloway, who was wrapped in a blanket and holding a thermos of tea like a weapon. Freeze? The landlord is working on it. The landlord hasn't returned my call in 4 months. He's a busy man. He's a negligent man. There's a difference. Ethan stood at the back of the crowd with his arms crossed. Victoria was beside him, her phone already out, scrolling through something. He leaned over. What are you doing? Finding the number for the city housing authority. Gary just said the landlord is working on it. Gary also said the elevator would be fixed by September. It's January, and I took the stairs this morning with a laptop bag and a box of files and nearly broke my ankle on the second-floor landing. You don't have to get involved in this. Victoria looked up from her phone. I live here, Ethan. My pipes froze last night. I had to brush my teeth with bottled water. I'm involved. She called the housing authority that afternoon. By the next morning, an inspector had been dispatched. By the end of the week, the landlord, a man named Gerald Whitfield, who owned 14 properties and maintained approximately 0 of them, had received a formal violation notice and a 60-day deadline to replace the boiler or face fines that would make his accountant weep. How did you do that? Ethan asked, genuinely baffled. He'd lived in the building for 6 years and had never seen any complaint result in anything faster than a form letter. I called the housing authority, and then I called a reporter at the city paper who covers housing violations. And then I called Gerald Whitfield's office directly and told his assistant that the reporter was very interested in writing a story about a landlord who lets families with children freeze in January. You bluffed. I negotiated. There's a difference. That's what Noah says about everything. Where do you think he learned it? Ethan stared at her. She stared back. And then he did something he hadn't done in her presence since they were 22 years old. He laughed. Not a polite laugh, not an almost laugh, but a real one. The kind that came from the gut and surprised him on its way out. Victoria's face split into a grin so wide it showed the gap between her teeth. And she laughed too. And for about 10 seconds, they stood in the hallway, laughing at nothing and everything and the sheer, stupid absurdity of 2 people who had lost each other for a decade and found each other again in a building with no heat. Mrs. Calloway's door opened. She poked her head out, saw them laughing in the hallway, and nodded approvingly. It's about time, she said, and closed her door again. The boiler was replaced by the end of the month. Victoria followed up with 3 more calls to the housing authority about the elevator, the water staining, and the electrical wiring in the basement. Gary started avoiding her in the hallways. The other tenants started referring to her as the lawyer lady, even though she wasn't a lawyer, which Victoria found deeply amusing and did nothing to correct. I'm not a lawyer, she told Ethan over coffee one morning. They'd started having coffee together on the morning she worked from home, sitting at his kitchen table while Noah ate breakfast and talked about whatever was occupying his mind that day. But if they want to think I am, that probably helps. Lawyers terrify people. CEOs don't terrify people? CEOs terrify investors. Lawyers terrify everyone. You terrify Gary. Gary is terrified of confrontation in general. I once asked him to fix the light in the stairwell, and he looked at me like I'd asked him to defuse a bomb. Noah appeared at the table with a bowl of cereal and an expression that suggested he had been eavesdropping. Are you guys dating? The kitchen went silent. Ethan's coffee cup stopped halfway to his mouth. Victoria's hand froze on her mug. They looked at each other over the table with the mutual panic of two adults who had been carefully avoiding a label and had just been ambushed by a 7-year-old with no filter. "What?" Ethan said. "Tyler's mom says when adults have coffee together every morning and laugh a lot, that means they're dating. She said it's called courting." "That's a weird word." "We're not. It's just coffee." "Tyler's mom also says it's just coffee is what adults say when they're definitely dating." "Tyler's mom needs to mind her own business." "She said you'd say that too." Ethan looked at Victoria, who was pressing her lips together so hard that her jaw was shaking. She was trying not to laugh. She was failing. "Victoria and I are friends," Ethan said, choosing each word with the precision of a man walking through a minefield. "Friends have coffee. That's a normal thing that friends do." "Do friends hold hands?" "We don't hold hands." "You did on Christmas." Ethan opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Nothing came out. He looked at Victoria for help. She looked at the ceiling. "We're figuring things out," Ethan said finally. "Adults sometimes need time to figure things out." Noah considered this with the seriousness of a Supreme Court justice. Then he nodded. "Okay, but if you're going to be dating, can we also get a dog? I feel like it's a package deal." "It's not a package deal." "It could be." "Eat your cereal." Noah ate his cereal with an air of satisfaction that suggested he considered the conversation a victory. And Ethan and Victoria sat across from each other and didn't look at each other and drank their coffee, and both turned slightly red, which Mrs. Calloway would have noticed immediately, and Noah, mercifully, did not mention. After Noah left for school, Victoria had started walking him some mornings, on the days she worked from home, which Ethan allowed because the alternative was arguing with both of them, and he was outnumbered. Ethan and Victoria stood in the kitchen with the empty cereal bowl between them and the question Noah had dropped into the room still hanging in the air like smoke. "So," Victoria said. "So, Tyler's mom has some theories. Tyler's mom is going to be the death of me. Are we going to talk about it? About Tyler's mom? About us?" Ethan turned to the sink and started washing the cereal bowl, even though it barely needed washing because he needed something to do with his hands. "What about us?" "Come on, Ethan. I'm washing a bowl. You're avoiding the conversation." "I'm multitasking." Victoria stepped closer. Not close enough to touch, but close enough that he could feel her presence beside him, the warmth of another person, the weight of her attention. "Your 7-year-old just asked if we're dating. That means he's thinking about it. That means it's real enough that a child can see it. So either we talk about what this is, or we keep pretending it's just coffee and wait for Noah to bring it up again at the worst possible moment, which he will, because he's your son, and your son has absolutely no sense of timing." Ethan turned off the faucet. He dried his hands. He leaned against the counter and looked at her. "I don't know how to do this," he said. "I know. I'm not saying that to be difficult. I'm saying it because it's true. I don't know how to be with someone. I've been alone so long that I've forgotten the mechanics of it. I don't know how to share space without panicking. I don't know how to trust someone with the parts of my life that matter without waiting for them to leave. I don't know how to be a person who lets another person in and doesn't spend every night lying awake wondering when they're going to walk out. I know all of that. Then you know why I can't just say, yes, we're dating, let's do this. Because doing this means risking everything I've built, not just for me, for Noah. And I can't." His voice cracked. He clenched his jaw and waited for it to pass. "I can't mess this up. He's the only thing I've ever done right." Victoria was quiet for a long moment. Then she pulled out a kitchen chair and sat down. Not dramatically, not urgently. She just sat, like someone settling in for a conversation that was going to take as long as it needed to take. "Then let's not call it dating," she said. "Let's not call it anything. Let's just keep doing what we're doing. Coffee, dinners, homework, bad chicken, walks to school, and let it be whatever it is without forcing a label on it. You don't have to decide anything right now. You don't have to commit to anything or declare anything or figure anything out. You just have to keep showing up. And I'll keep showing up. And eventually, maybe the showing up will be enough. That's your strategy?" "That's my strategy." "It's very anti-corporate. No timeline, no deliverables, no KPIs. I'll send you a quarterly report if it makes you feel better." "It would, actually." She smiled. He almost smiled. And they left it there, undefined, unlabeled, unresolved in the way that real things always are. Because real things don't come with instruction manuals or clean endings, or moments where the music swells and everything clicks into place. February arrived, and with it came a development that Ethan hadn't anticipated, but probably should have. Victoria's company, Hale Industries, was featured in a national business magazine. The cover story was about female CEOs navigating corporate restructuring, and Victoria's face was on page 47, alongside a profile that described her as one of the most innovative minds in consumer technology. The article mentioned her divorce. It mentioned her decision to step back from full-time leadership. It did not mention where she was living or with whom, but the photographer had captured her walking into the company's downtown office in the same coat she wore in the hallway of their apartment building, and the juxtaposition. This woman, this building, this life she'd chosen over the one she left, suddenly felt very fragile. "People are going to find out where you live," Ethan said, sitting on her couch. She had more furniture now, a bookshelf, a lamp, framed photographs on the wall that he deliberately didn't look at too closely, reading the article on his phone while Victoria paced. "People already know where I live. My assistant knows. Marcus knows. My accountant knows. It's not a secret." It's not a secret, but it's also not a magazine article. There's a difference between people knowing and the world knowing. The world doesn't care where Victoria Hale lives. The business world does. Your investors do. The people who are counting on you to show up in a penthouse and look the part. They care. Victoria stopped pacing. "Is that what you're worried about? That I'm going to get embarrassed about living here?" "I'm worried about what happens when your two worlds collide. Right now, you've got this neat split. 3 days at the office being the CEO, 4 days here being the woman who walks my kid to school. But if those worlds start overlapping, if reporters show up, if board members start asking questions, if people start making assumptions about you and me, it's going to get messy. It's already messy, Ethan. It's been messy since the night I knocked on your door. I'm not afraid of messy." "You should be." "Why?" "Because messy gets people hurt." Victoria sat down across from him. She pulled her legs up underneath her and looked at him with the direct, unwavering focus that he imagined she used in boardrooms and investor meetings and any other situation where someone was trying to talk her out of something she'd already decided. "Let me tell you something about my life before this," she said. "My penthouse had a kitchen with a 6-burner stove and a sub-zero refrigerator and a marble island that sat 8 people. I never cooked a single meal in it, not one. I had a dining room with a table that cost more than your car. I ate at it maybe twice. I had closets full of clothes with tags still on them, a wine cellar I never opened, a balcony with a view that photographers wanted to shoot for design magazines. And I was the most miserable person I knew. Victoria, I'm not done. I have been rich, and I have been polished, and I have been everything that the world says you should want to be, and none of it, not one single piece of it, made me feel the way I feel when your son falls asleep on my shoulder during a nature documentary about octopuses. I don't care about the magazine. I don't care about the board. I don't care if every investor in the country thinks I've lost my mind. I have spent 10 years building a life that looked perfect and felt empty, and I am done. I am done performing. I am done pretending that success is about numbers on a balance sheet. Success is about a kid who drew me into his family picture. Success is about a man who makes terrible chicken and reads bedtime stories in voices and let me sleep on his couch during a blackout. That's success. Everything else is decoration." The apartment was quiet. The radiator, new, installed last week, actually functional, ticked softly in the corner. Victoria's phone buzzed on the coffee table. She didn't look at it. Ethan set his phone down. He looked at her for a long time. Then he stood up, crossed the room, and did something he had been wanting to do for weeks and refusing to do, and wanting to do, and refusing to do. The push and pull of it so constant that it had become background noise in his life, like the hum of the refrigerator or the buzz of the hallway light. He kissed her. Not smoothly, not like a movie. He misjudged the angle and their noses bumped, and she made a startled sound and his hand landed on her shoulder when he'd been aiming for her face. It was clumsy and awkward and slightly painful and absolutely nothing like the way two people who hadn't touched each other in 10 years were supposed to reconnect. It was perfect in its imperfection. It was real. Victoria's hands came up to his face, holding him there, and she kissed him back with a kind of desperate tenderness that communicated everything she hadn't said. The 10 years, the lost baby, the empty penthouse, the compass necklace she'd never taken off. He could taste salt and realized one of them was crying, and he wasn't sure which one. And it didn't matter because they were the same tears, the same grief, the same decade of loneliness finally breaking open and spilling out. They pulled apart. Ethan's forehead rested against hers. His breath was unsteady. His hands were shaking again, the way they'd shaken the first night she appeared, but this time they were shaking for a different reason. "That was terrible," she whispered. "I know, I'm out of practice. Your nose hit my eye. I noticed. Are you okay?" "I think I'll survive." She pulled back just enough to look at him. Her eyes were red. His were too. "So are we dating now?" "I think we have to tell Tyler's mom."
What?
She laughed. The sound was wet and broken and beautiful. "Noah's going to be insufferable about this. He's going to demand a dog within 24 hours. Probably. We're not getting a dog. We'll see." They stood there in her apartment, foreheads close, hands finding each other, and the word "we" sat between them like something new and terrifying and wonderful. We. Not I, not you. We. A two-letter word that changed everything. Spring came the way spring always came to that part of the city, reluctantly, in fits and starts, with cold mornings giving way to mild afternoons that fooled you into leaving your jacket at home and then punished you for it by evening. The trees along the sidewalk outside the apartment building put out tentative buds that looked half-hearted, like they weren't sure the weather could be trusted. Ethan understood the feeling. The months between January and April were not a montage. They were not a highlight reel of beautiful moments strung together with soft lighting and a soundtrack. They were real, which meant they were uneven, which meant there were good days and days that were both. There was the night Ethan woke up in a panic at 3 a.m, convinced that Victoria had left, that the apartment across the hall was empty, that she'd packed her things and disappeared the way she had 10 years ago. He got up, crossed the hallway in his boxers, and pressed his ear to her door like a lunatic until he heard the sound of her television and went back to bed feeling foolish and furious with himself. There was the argument they had about Noah's school project. Victoria wanted to help him build a scale model of the solar system using materials she'd ordered online. Ethan wanted him to use cardboard and paint because he believed struggle built character, and they stood in the kitchen whisper fighting about styrofoam planets while Noah sat in the living room completely oblivious, watching a video about black holes. "He doesn't need expensive supplies to learn," Ethan hissed. "He doesn't need to struggle unnecessarily to prove he's tough either," Victoria hissed back. "I'm not trying to prove he's tough. I'm trying to teach him that you can make something good out of whatever you've got. And I'm trying to show him that accepting help isn't weakness." They glared at each other across the counter. Then Ethan exhaled through his nose and rubbed his eyes. "We're arguing about planets." "We are." "This is stupid." "It really is." "Split the difference. He uses cardboard for the inner planets and your fancy stuff for the outer ones." "That's actually reasonable. Don't sound so surprised." The solar system project got an A. Noah told his entire class that he'd had a team working on it, which was technically true, and made his teacher raise an eyebrow. There was the Saturday in March when Victoria took Noah to the zoo while Ethan worked overtime at Henderson's, and when he got home, his apartment was covered in zoo-related paraphernalia: a stuffed penguin, a souvenir cup, a poster of a red panda that Noah insisted on hanging in his room. And Noah was talking so fast about giraffes that he forgot to breathe between sentences. "Did you know giraffes sleep standing up, and their tongues are like 20 inches long? Victoria let me get the poster because I said I'd do extra homework and she said that was a reasonable trade." Ethan looked at Victoria, who was sitting on the couch looking tired and happy and slightly sunburned. "A reasonable trade? I'm teaching him negotiation. He already knows negotiation. He's been negotiating since he could talk. Now he's learning advanced negotiation. He doesn't need advanced negotiation. He's 7. Almost 8, Noah corrected. My birthday is in 6 weeks. Ethan's stomach dropped. Not because of the birthday. He'd been planning that for months. But because of the almost 8, 7 had felt manageable. 7 was small. 8 was halfway to 16, which was practically an adult, which meant the time he had, the morning walks, the bedtime stories, the hand-holding that was already starting to fade, was running out faster than he wanted to count. "We should do something for his birthday," Victoria said later, after Noah was in bed. She was standing in the kitchen doorway, leaning against the frame the way Ethan always did, and the familiarity of the posture, his gesture on her body, made something turn over in his chest. "I usually do cake and a movie. Keep it small. What if we did something bigger this year?" Define bigger. "A party. At the park. His friends from school, Tyler, a few others, balloons, cake that doesn't come from a box." "I always use box cake." "I know. I've had your box cake. It tastes like sweetened cardboard." "That's hurtful." "It's accurate. Let me make the cake. My grandmother's recipe. The same one we used for the cookies." Ethan considered this. A birthday party. With people. With Victoria. With a cake that wasn't from a box. It was the kind of thing other families did. The normal kind. The kind with 2 parents and a plan and a bakery cake and coordinated napkins. He'd never been that family. He'd been the dad who stuck a candle in a muffin and called it a celebration because that was all he could manage. "Okay," he said, "but I'm handling the balloons." "You can handle the balloons. And I'm still making my box cake too, as a backup." "It's not a backup if nobody eats it." "Somebody will eat it." "Nobody will eat it, Ethan. I'll eat it." "You'll eat it out of stubbornness, not enjoyment." Same result. Noah's 8th birthday fell on a Saturday in April. The party was at Kessler Park, 3 blocks from the apartment, on a patch of grass near the playground that Ethan had reserved by filling out a form at the city office and paying a $30 deposit that he would never get back because the form said non-refundable, in letters so small he needed a magnifying glass. 11 kids showed up. Tyler brought a present wrapped in newspaper because his mom believed in recycling. Mrs. Calloway came with her knee brace and a folding chair and a bag of the hard candies that Noah was forbidden from chewing. Dale showed up with a card that contained a $20 bill and a note that said, "Buy something stupid. That's what money is for at your age." And Victoria was there. She arrived early to set up. She'd made the cake, chocolate, 3 layers, slightly lopsided on one side, because the oven in her apartment ran hot and she hadn't adjusted for it. She'd brought plates and cups and napkins that didn't match because she'd bought them from 2 different stores. And she'd blown up balloons until she was lightheaded and tied them to the fence posts with string that kept coming untied. It was not a perfect party. The cake listed to the left. Half the balloons escaped before the kids arrived. The pizza was late. One of the children, not Tyler, a different one, threw up in the bushes after spinning too fast on the tire swing. Noah got frosting in his hair and grass stains on his new pants, and a scrape on his elbow from falling off the monkey bars, and he declared it the greatest day of his life. Ethan stood at the edge of the park and watched. Victoria was in the middle of the chaos, helping kids line up for cake, wiping frosting off faces, laughing at something Tyler said that was probably inappropriate. Noah orbited around her like a planet around a sun, circling back every few minutes to show her something or tell her something or just stand near her for a second before zooming off again. Dale appeared at Ethan's side with a cup of lemonade. "She's good with him." "Yeah. She's good for you too." "Dale, I'm just saying what I see. You're standing straighter. You smiled 3 times today. I counted. That's a new record." I smile. "You don't smile. You do a thing with your mouth that's in the neighborhood of a smile but doesn't quite commit. Today, you committed. 3 times. Ethan watched Victoria hand Noah a slice of cake and then reach down and wipe frosting off his chin with her thumb, a gesture so natural, so automatic, that she didn't even seem to notice she'd done it. But Ethan noticed. He noticed everything. He noticed the way she kept track of Noah in a crowd without appearing to watch him. He noticed the way she adjusted her pace when she walked with him so he didn't have to jog to keep up. He noticed the way she listened when he talked. Not the polite, half-attention listening that most adults gave children, but actual listening, the kind where you stop what you're doing and look the person in the eye and make them feel like what they're saying matters. These were things mothers did. He knew that. He'd watched enough other parents at school events and birthday parties and grocery stores to recognize the choreography. And seeing Victoria perform it, not perfectly, not like she'd been doing it for years, but with a sincerity that couldn't be faked, made something settle inside him. Not a decision, not a declaration, just a settling, like a foundation being laid, like the first pour of concrete into a trench that would hold something up. After the party, after the kids had been collected by their parents and the mess had been cleaned up, and the remaining balloons had been set free into the sky by Noah, who said they deserved their freedom, the three of them walked home through the late afternoon light. Noah was between them, holding Ethan's hand on one side and Victoria's on the other, swinging their arms with the aggressive enthusiasm of a child who had consumed 3 pieces of cake and was approaching a sugar crash of historic proportions. "This was the best birthday ever," Noah said. "Better than last year?" Ethan asked. "Last year we ate muffins and watched a movie about robots." "That was a great movie about robots." "It was fine. This was better. This had people." People. Ethan thought about that word for the rest of the walk home. People. Not presents or cake or balloons. People. His son's measure of a good birthday was the presence of other human beings, which meant that for the previous 7 birthdays, the ones with muffins and movies and just the 2 of them, Noah had been keeping score, and the score had been lower than Ethan realized. That stung. Not badly, not like a wound, but like a bruise you discover hours after bumping into something. A dull ache that reminds you of a collision you didn't register at the time. That evening, after Noah had crashed from his sugar high and fallen asleep on the couch fully dressed with frosting still in his hair, Ethan carried him to bed and stood in the doorway of his room and looked at the wall. The family drawing from Christmas was pinned there now next to the red panda poster and a spelling test that had gotten a perfect score. 3 people, a dog, a house. The dog wasn't real, the house wasn't real. But the 3 people were. Ethan walked to the living room where Victoria was on the couch, her shoes off, her head tipped back against the cushion, her eyes closed. She looked exhausted. Party planning, he was learning, was more physically demanding than corporate restructuring. "Hey." She opened one eye. "Is he out?" "He's out. Didn't even make it to pajamas." "I'm not surprised. He ate enough cake for 3 children. Your cake, by the way." "What about it?" "It was better than box cake." Victoria opened both eyes. "Was that a compliment?" "It was a factual observation." "It sounded like a compliment." "Take it however you want." She smiled, the crinkly kind, Noah's metric, the kind that meant it was real. Ethan sat down on the couch beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. He didn't move away. She didn't move away. The apartment was quiet and warm and smelled like chocolate frosting and grass and the particular, irreplaceable scent of a child who'd had a good day. "I found the drawing," Ethan said. "The one Noah did at Christmas. He pinned it on his wall. The one with the 3 of us. And the dog. And the dog. He still wants the dog." "Of course he does." Ethan turned his head and looked at her. She turned her head and looked at him. Their faces were very close. He could see the compass necklace at her throat, the scratch on the glass catching the lamplight. He could see the lines at the corners of her eyes that hadn't been there when she was 20. He could see the tiny scar on her chin from a bike accident she'd told him about years ago in a studio apartment that no longer existed. "I want to try," he said. "Try what?" "This. Us. Whatever this is. I want to stop calling it coffee and dinners and whatever we're doing and actually try. I don't know if it'll work. I don't know if I'm capable of being the kind of person who doesn't panic at 3 in the morning because he thinks you've left. I don't know if I'll ever fully trust that you won't disappear again. But I know that my kid drew a picture of his family and you're in it. And I know that every morning I look forward to coffee with you more than anything else in my day. And I know that the night you slept on my couch was the first time I fell asleep without trying in years. So I want to try. If you do." Victoria reached up and touched his face. Her hand was warm. Her fingers shook slightly, a tremor so small that most people wouldn't have noticed it, but Ethan noticed everything about her now. Every hesitation, every tremor, every micro-expression that crossed her face in the space between one breath and the next. "I've been trying since the night I knocked on your door," she said. "I just didn't know it yet." He leaned forward and kissed her, and this time he didn't misjudge the angle. It wasn't perfect. Her lip caught on his teeth, and his hand got tangled in her hair, but it was real and present and deliberate, and that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. When they pulled apart, she was smiling and crying at the same time, which was a combination he was getting used to, and he realized that he was too, which was new. "So," she said, "are we dating now?" I think Tyler's mom would say yes. Should we tell Noah? He's going to ask about the dog. Probably. We're not getting a dog. Not yet. Not yet implies eventually. Eventually implies possibility. You're negotiating again. I'm always negotiating. That's what I do. Ethan pulled her close. She leaned into him, her head against his shoulder, her hand on his chest. The compass necklace pressed between them. The one he'd bought 12 years ago at a shop on Franklin Street, the one with the scratch on the glass, the one she'd kept through a decade and a marriage and a divorce and a loss that neither of them would ever fully recover from. It pointed north or south or wherever compasses pointed when they were pressed between two people who had taken the longest possible route back to each other. The apartment was quiet. The building hummed around them, pipes and radiators, and the new boiler that worked because Victoria had scared a negligent landlord into compliance. Somewhere down the hall, Mrs. Calloway was watching her evening shows. Somewhere below, Gary was probably hiding from a maintenance request. Somewhere above, a neighbor was playing music too loud. And somewhere outside, the city moved and breathed and didn't care at all about two people on a couch in a walk-up apartment who had wasted 10 years being afraid of the only thing worth being afraid of. Here's what nobody tells you about second chances. They don't erase the first chance. The lost baby, the years apart, the empty apartment, the sleepless nights, the walls Ethan built and the distance Victoria created, all of it was still there. You don't get a second chance to undo the damage of the first. What you get is a chance to build something new on top of it, with the cracks still showing, with the scars still visible, with the full knowledge that it could all fall apart again because that's what life does. It falls apart and you rebuild, and it falls apart and you rebuild. And the rebuilding is the whole point. Ethan Brooks was 32 years old. He fixed washing machines for a living. He lived in a building with bad wiring and a landlord who didn't return calls. He made terrible chicken and burned garlic bread and used box cake mix even when someone offered a better recipe. He was stubborn and cautious and held grudges too long and panicked at 3 a.m. over things that hadn't happened. And he was, for the first time in 10 years, not just surviving. Victoria Hale was 30 years old. She ran a billion-dollar company 3 days a week and spent the other 4 in sweatpants. She kept a compass necklace that pointed to a past she couldn't change and a future she was building one imperfect day at a time. She had lost a child she never got to hold and found one she hadn't expected, a 7-year-old, 8 now, with messy hair and endless questions and a rock collection with 47 named specimens. And she was, for the first time since a hospital room in Richmond, home. Noah was 8. He wanted a dog. He wanted a house. He wanted the picture on his wall to be real, the 3 figures, the floppy-eared animal, the building that looked like the one he lived in, but somehow better. He didn't understand everything that had happened between the 2 adults in his life, and he didn't need to. He understood what mattered. They were there, both of them. Every morning, every evening, every burnt pancake and overcooked pasta and lopsided birthday cake. They were there. And in a building where 2 broken people had found each other again by accident and stubbornness, and the kind of dumb luck that only happens when you stop trying to control everything, a family was forming. Not the kind from a magazine. Not the kind with a perfect house and a golden retriever and matching Christmas sweaters. The real kind. The messy kind. The kind that fights about styrofoam planets and burns garlic bread and holds hands in hallways with bad lighting and starts every morning with coffee that tastes like cardboard because the machine is secondhand and nobody's bothered to replace it. The kind that stays.